Welcome back after lunch. We're going to continue with our charter school amendments bill. And before we open it up for public comment, I might see if there's anyone on the committee that would like to make further comments or questions, or seeing none, we will open it up for public comment. Anyone want to comment on the charter schools amendments? Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jed Ciccarelli, CFO for Laramie County School District Number 1. Mr. Chairman, shortly before the break, you had asked about how school districts were currently operating some of these components like special education and transportation with our existing charter schools. Our district will be a little unique in the sense that we'll have both district-approved charter schools as well as the SLIB as the authorizer for the upcoming year. At least currently, for special education, how the district has kind of approached this is through the charter. We've evolved as the charter schools have built their capacity to provide special education services. Early on, the district was solely responsible for ensuring that FAPE was provided, that we were providing the right staff for related services, resource room teachers, whatever adaptive technology might be required, our district was solely responsible. But as the charter schools grew and built out their capacity, we shift a lot of that responsibility back to the charter schools. So currently, our two charter schools do administer all special education services. And the workaround, if you will, for the funding piece from the operations side has been that we have to, as a school district, pay the charter school for their own staff and then turn around and then in a sense, request reimbursement from the state. So it's a little bit of a work through that we worked with the Department of Education on how to address that. Certainly the bill draft would address one of the biggest components of that. What's unclear, Mr. Chairman, is how that would impact the state approved charter schools in the sense that we don't have a charter. We don't have the ability to kind of designate out how that process looks. Additionally, on the transportation side, it's a little bit different. Our district provides all transportation services, and there's a bill back process with the charter school. In a sense, we expend our own resources, utilize our own staff for transportation services for the charter schools, and then they pay the school district for those resources. That money kind of washes in the sense that we ask for reimbursement from the state. We front that cost for a year, and then we track and monitor that with the charter schools. What I'm not real clear on is what that means for everything from fleet management with the change in the bill as far as is a state-approved charter school eligible to purchase a bus. Right now, our fleet is limited at a district based on our fleet size as of a certain date and statute. And so those aspects, as well as others, are certainly some things that we're trying to navigate and understand as we move forward. But Mr. Chairman, to give a little bit of context on at least how we're approaching that with our existing charter schools, we thought we'd give that information.
All right, thank you. Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, let me see if I've understood this correctly. What you're describing is how it works where the district and the charter school get together and negotiate a budget, and that would work with a new one that the organized that has been approved by the SLIP board, because they still can come negotiate a budget with you. And as I understand what we're doing in this bill, is what happens if you get a district and charter school that simply are fighting and can't come to an agreement. Is that a correct understanding, that everything's going to work just fine, you can work around it and whatnot if the district and the charter are able to negotiate successfully? And what we're really talking about is just the circumstance where they can't.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's one aspect, but I think it's multifaceted in the sense that you agree and work on a budget, and that's clear. That's what's anticipated in statute. But there's a lot of other aspects that go along with the operations side that wouldn't be dictated through a budget agreement. What happens with dispute resolution with that school? What happens if there's some type of punitive or restorative services that need to be provided? On transportation, if the charter school decides they want to buy a bus, the district doesn't feel they have the enrollment that warrants purchasing a bus, it's not clear that we would have any oversight or any say in the matter. And so that's only the pieces that that we've kind of worked through with regards to the statute. There's also the other pieces that go along with, as Mr. Wilmarth and Ms. Hytrek said earlier, just the funding mechanism. It's understood that we will have to be responsible for all data reporting to the state. This piece at least moves some of the grant administration from the district to the school, which would be seeking their own grants and approvals from the state. But we still have this weird nexus where the district has some responsibilities, but we don't have direct oversight. And so that's what we're grappling with.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So is it possible then, do you think with the way this bill's written, that bus routes could be duplicated? In other words, because the charter school might have students down a certain route, your district has students down a certain route. But if the charter school decides to have a bus, they could have a bus. And so we end up basically duplicating routes within the district.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, certainly that is a possibility. Our district operates on, triads and boundaries and attendance areas. And so we optimize our routes to kind of meet those boundary areas. If you have an open enrollment across the entire city, it could have an impact if you're looking at the kind of the overall cost of a charter school transportation services versus just kind of the compartmentalized district services.
Okay, anyone else?
Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think if we're concerned about the transportation and if you were to remove on page 6, line 4, the reference to WS 2113-320, would that remove transportation from this? So that would be something that wouldn't be covered unless they negotiated to deal with the school district. Is that a correct understanding? And I'm not quite sure whether I'm asking the school district or the LSO staff.
Tanya, do you want to weigh in on that?
Mr. Chairman, I think there are two references in both of the new language on page 6, lines 1 through 5, and then on page 6, lines 20 through 22, and on to lines 1 and 2. Both of those references to the transportation statute would require deletion.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with that, but that is the right reference for the transportation, is it not?
Yes, 320. And also, I think there would be a conforming amendment perhaps on line 22, page 5, if that was to be eliminated again from the discussion and the assumptions for school districts to return it back to the status quo.
Mr. Chairman, page which?
5.
Mr. Chairman, page 5, lines 21 and 22, those were amended to eliminate the references to the transportation and the special education adjustments as far as the assumptions where the parties begin their negotiations for funding, and then pulled out in the separate romanettes that I mentioned previously on pages 6 and 7.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I think if there is concern about the transportation, the possibility for an abuse there, I think that would be the way to handle it.
Okay. All right, any further comment, public comment? Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Carrie Klein, and I'm here representing Academica. today. I'm going to introduce, this is BJ Bookman. He's just starting here in Cheyenne as the headmaster principal of the Cheyenne Classical Academy, a school that was recently approved by the SLIB board, and he has a few comments he would like to make. And then we also have Representative Olson.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is BJ Bookman. I'm the principal and incoming headmaster at Cheyenne Classical Academy. First of all, I'm thankful to work with a board such as Cheyenne Classical Academy has put together. And our hope and intent is to partnership with the district as much as possible to provide the services for the students and our parents. These are students who currently are receiving services within the district at some point, someplace, somewhere. So if those students choose to come to our school, we want to continue with those services and at our school as well. And it'd be our intent to have the option to be the LEA for this opportunity, to continue those services and to make sure that we have strong, positive relationships in the transition of these special education services.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, a couple of things. I wanted to address Representative Summers' question about transportation. I think if I understood your question right, your scenario would be if the district and a charter school didn't agree, and the charter school went on its own and decided to create its own transportation route. That's the hope that that doesn't occur. I think that's in Mr. Bookman's comments that I think any good charter school would try to work with its district. We already have a model for that in Cheyenne on what it looks like, not using a charter school, but using an alternative high school. Triumph High School does engage in busing services, and they use a hub-type system where they're being bused through the different triads, and then they all get on one bus at a hub to go to Triumph. You know, something like, and I think Representative Harshman would know how it works in Natrona County, which is a school choice county where they don't have boundaries like we do in Laramie County. So I know that doesn't perfectly address your question, Representative Summers, Mr. Chairman, but I paint that as a picture of possibility that I think the scenario where you end up with double funding or a double funding issue, double expense issue rather, from transportation is probably unlikely because we already have, at least here in this county, a perfect model for it. And for a charter school in Natrona County, they're already used to busing all over the county because they don't have triad lines like we do here. So I wanted to address that. You know, I do want to address I also want Mr. Chairman to address this double funding issue. That's existing statute prior to the change in law that occurred a year ago. So that dates back to the early 2000s. The point is, though, at least in my experience with a charter school, the need for double funding is slim to none. I don't understand the purpose of that statute, why it was originally enacted. I wasn't here then. Maybe someone could speak to it on its necessity, but I think I watched this committee get pretty caught up on that double funding issue. And if it's easier to eliminate that double funding, it's pretty easy just to strike that piece of existing statute. Go ahead and do it because I don't understand the purpose of it. You're going to provide numbers on March 1 based on your enrollment. You're going to start receiving funding July 1 when the budget kicks in place if you're a charter school. And by the time October 1 comes around, you're going to know exactly what your enrollment is for that year and the next. You'll have, you'll know what next year's enrollment is at least going to be, and you'll have received 3 months of double funding, and I don't understand why you would. So from my perspective, if that makes the committee feel better about it, great. Last comment, Mr. Chairman, just on the LEA, you know, at the end of the day, if you don't pass this bill and there's a student who has special needs and they want to enroll in a charter school and their special education needs are still going to be met. Legally, they have to be. And those dollars are still going to be spent. Those are federal dollars, by the way, not state dollars. They're still going to be spent, so that's all going to happen. The purpose of this bill, at least from my perspective, is to designate who is in control of providing that service, whether it's the district or if you make the charter school an LEA, you're putting the charter school in, you're giving the charter school control over that. And what that means is a person like Mr. Bookman would meet directly with the parents and get to decide, well, the nuances to those special education needs. Maybe they want to keep the kid in the classroom and do in-classroom for whatever it is, as opposed to pulling them out of the classroom and sending them to another facility where that district employee might be, just as an example. So I think at the end of the day, it doesn't change the dollars. It just changes who's at the table with the parents on that IEP discussing what it's going to look like at the end of the day. You give a charter school more control over that. You don't change the dollars. Those exist no matter what because the kid has needs. And with that, I take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, questions? Yes, Mr. Co-Chair.
One minor technical correction. The federal dollars are only a small portion of it. The dollars we're talking about here with special ed are predominantly state dollars. The feds promised a lot and produced a little on this one. But that's just a technicality. Mr. Chairman, I think we do need to make sure that the kids have the special ed services available.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And, I don't know if my question is, on the whole double funding thing. So we were talking before lunch, but it sounds like you got that straight and it's a little different, that actually it is a double funding. And so my question to staff is, when is that utilized? What is it utilized for? And I guess, Jed, I might pull you back up here again because you guys do open new schools, and I'll wait till these folks are done. But, do we need that piece of statute or can we strike it in this bill? Or can we strike it just for charter schools?
LSO?
Mr. Chairman, it's a policy call. The double enrollment has been on the books, as Representative Olson indicated, since the early 2000s. It is unique to charter schools. We don't do it for any other school. Additionally, charter schools are funded in the first year of operation. That is also unique to charter schools. If a school district opens up a brand new school, they're not resourced in the funding model until the year after because the model is based upon prior year enrollment. Now, granted, when a new school opens in a district, it is the enrollment comes from existing students that have already been resourced from the prior year ADM. But the two unique things for charter schools is the double enrollment in the first year. That's a policy choice of the legislature. Also, the policy choice of the legislature is to resource them in the first year of operation. I suspect that is because they don't have reserves like school districts have reserves. They're brand new to the system, and they don't have access to the district's reserve to expend for the first year of operation.
My take is that first year funding is needed for cash flow purposes, and your charter school is going to have trouble operating if you don't have that. But the double enrollment feature, frankly, we didn't find that when we did the redo last year, and I don't see any need for it. And LSO, am I right in thinking that just getting rid of that is a simple amendment? Can you tell us what it is?
Mr. Chairman, it's subparagraph, it's 21.3.314, subsection A, paragraph 1, subparagraph C. I don't know if there's any other conforming amendments, but we would make those as appropriate if that's the motion to repeal that subparagraph.
Mr. Chairman, just one last question.
Sure, go ahead.
And so, Mr. Chairman, this is, I guess, back to you, your group. On the transportation, how important is it to keep the transportation piece in the bill? Or do we just, or what's the consequence to you all, do you think, if we pull that out? In other words, we don't guarantee that you can get that reimbursement. You've got to work with the school district to make that work out.
Mr. Chairman, I'll say something that I think Mr. Bookman is, as an administrator, can really speak to that as well. But honestly, I don't think it really impacts, it's not going to impact most charter schools, particularly the charter school that I know that I'm involved with. It's not going to, because we find that parental involvement is through the roof with a charter school. They Statistically, I've heard that parents will drive 30 minutes in other communities across the country to get their student to a charter school. In Cheyenne, in Casper, where these existing schools are, and in Chugwater, that's just not going to be an issue, I think, because the parental involvement is going to be a big piece. But I do know Mr. Bookman can speak to that as well.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, the transportation issue as a single school would be something I would try to avoid as much as possible. However, there are significant needs sometimes where transportation has to be identified for the student who has a current or existing IEP. And at this point, it's an unnecessary burden that a charter school should take on. You think of all the needs for transportation, you've got a driver, you have insurance, you have all of those things on the outside that take away funding from the services initially. And so at this point, I would rely upon other services, and that would be basically the connection in the family and the relationship. So.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Let me speak to the situation in Casper. And frankly, I think Casper has overdone the transportation on the school choice. If we could have a problem, if we couldn't come to a district agreement with the district in 3 areas, if we had a charter school student who lived in Midwest Edgerton or along that bus route and couldn't get the district to transport them in to the hub and some way to transport from the hub to the charter school, which would be in Mills, a couple miles away, that could be a problem. Same problem would apply to the bus route that comes in from Powder River to Casper and from Alcova to Casper, that second bus route. But for 95% of the potential students in the Casper urban area, I think the parents are expecting to transport and would, in general, be willing to do that. So I think if, under the best circumstance, we'll be able to negotiate a deal with the school district to provide the transportation for the students from the outlying areas, if there are some, there may well be. But in the event we don't, it's not going to affect that many students. And we can come back and deal with it.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Matt, maybe you can remind me, we resource buses based on, how do we resource buses now? If potentially a charter school decided they wanted to create their own busing system, what constraints are they under? I know that's under rule and regulation of the department. There's some statutory constraints, but what would they be limited to if we just kind of let this go? What are the constraints that are in place?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Summers, I believe Mr. Ciccarelli indicated, and he is correct, I can't recall if we amended the statute a couple years ago or not, but districts are limited on the number of buses they are entitled to based upon the enrollment of the total district. And there are some unique circumstances, I believe, where districts can ask for a waiver or not. But the premise is that those purchases occur based upon district enrollment needs, and those are the reasons for those purchases. Just because a single school opens in a district doesn't necessarily mean a new bus has to be purchased because of routing requirements. But you're right, 2113-320 certainly has requirements under the statute, and then the Department of Education has further rule and regulations to implement this section of law.
So, Mr. Chairman, it's starting to dawn on me. So this is a district-wide issue. But if we give charter schools the authority to provide transportation, but the statute says it has to be district-wide, so how would that even function? I mean, if it's a district-wide issue and a charter school has the authority to be reimbursed 100%, are they going to mesh? Have we meshed the statutes enough even to allow this to occur?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, the intent, 21-13-320 is replete with references to the district. There's not a reference to a specific school. And I think as Mr. Ciccarelli said, you know, they've sort of worked this out for their school district, and I think that is the intent. The piece that you've added to the statute is for reimbursement purposes only. It's not about programmatic requirements. These charter schools are still required to follow 21-13-320. They'll still be required to go through the rules and regulations, which contemplates district-level transportation. They would have to work with the district to identify those costs that might be reimbursable as provided in the new language.
So, Mr. Chairman, if we change the language as it exists in the bill, then we really do we do anything? Because if the districts have to make the decision, then how could a charter school be reimbursed for transportation costs if it's a district-wide issue? So I'm trying to understand it. How could a charter school utilize this reimbursal outside of the district, a district deciding that's how it should be done?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Summers, I will give you a hypothetical example. Let's say a district has an additional activity bus, an additional daily route mile bus that under their current enrollments aren't being utilized to its full capacity. And they offer those to be utilized to the charter school. And the charter school uses its credit card to pay for the fuel, pay for the salary, you know, they pay for the salaries and benefits of the bus driver, the insurance or whatever other costs, or maybe the insurance is covered under the district's, you know, plan for the bus, but the salary and benefits of the bus driver that they employ, that they were able to hire rather than the district, and the fuel that they're utilizing let's say they don't go and fuel up at the district's fuel site, but they go down to the local gas station fuel up. Those would be reimbursable expenditures. And the charter school would be expending those dollars. How I read the statute is that they would be able to, through the district's reimbursement form to the Department of Education, claim for reimbursement, and those expenditures would then come back to the charter school in their payments. And real quick, I found the limitation on the buses. It's 21-13-320, subsection G, paragraph 2. It reads, the number of buses and other student transportation vehicles comprising a district's fleet shall comply with the fleet size standards established by rule of the department, which shall be established to ensure safe and efficient student transportation.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So, Matt, it just looks to me like you can't, in other words, a charter school, if we put this in place, a charter school can't go out and buy 5 new buses for 7 kids. We have constraints in statute. This is maybe not necessary, but it's likely would just be ancillary costs like fuel or other things. Is that fairly, I guess we'll find out. We
Mr.
put it in place and
Chairman.
it gets abused, you can always put the hammer down.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think a good way to sort of couch this is it changes the negotiation position of the charter schools with the school districts, particularly in the instance of if a charter school that's approved by the SLIB cannot reach an agreement with the district that they're working with. It changes their negotiating power with this provision in the statute.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to be clear, Tanya, that changes the negotiating position by saying, it takes it off the table by saying that, honestly, the charter school wins. The charter school gets 100% reimbursement, in all honesty, for whatever it wants in terms of transportation. Is that a blunt assessment of what you just said?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Connolly, in part. For those charter schools that are approved by the SLIB that cannot reach an agreement with the district, they will receive reimbursement for those costs that are reimbursable under the statutes and the rules and regulations. So it's not a wide open, you can go get a bus for 5 kids and, bill gas and a bus driver. As Matt said, you still have to comply with 21-13-320 and the Department of Education's rules and regulations governing transportation. For those districts that are working with a school district, that are approved by a school district and not the SLIB, you would assume that they can come to some sort of an agreement. The new language sort of authorizes that the assumption is they are entitled to those expenses. So that is where you will begin your negotiating position with the school district. It's a different dynamic if the school district approves the charter school than if it's approved by the SLIB, which I think is why subsection F exists.
Follow up?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Let me see if I can formulate kind of my question and my concern. It does seem to me that it puts the charter school in a superior bargaining position when there is a issue between the district and a new charter school. And so giving the example of getting 7 buses for 5 kids or 5 buses for 7 kids, we'll take that off the table. But what about one that would be more likely, one with 20 or 30 kids in a charter school? That's where I see that there could be much more of an issue regarding transportation and the negotiation with the district, because in part it would decrease the number of students that are associated with the district, I would guess, right? They might not be able, the district might not be able to get a new bus or whatever is associated with the rules and regs regarding the fleet. And the charter school could get a bus.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Connolly, if the number of students doesn't change for the school district and the rules don't authorize a new bus purchase, the district cannot just, and the charter school unilaterally, cannot just go purchase the bus and then submit that receipt to the Department of Education. The new language that's contemplated requires that it's a reimbursable expenditure under 21-13-320, and 320 includes rulemaking authority for the Department of Ed. And as Matt just cited, as far as like the number of buses, that's dictated at a district level. And these charter schools, whether approved by the SLIB or by the district, are still public schools within a school district. And I think, kind of hearkening back to some of the comments earlier, the reason that transportation, special education, isolation and maintenance, and some of the other provisions included that were excluded from the negotiation, I think the reason those were excluded is because they are district level resources. This language gives charter schools sort of a voice under either instance, district approved or SLIB approved, to come to the table and say, we're entitled to some of this money for this in accordance with the statute and the rules and regulations. Now, whether it would be an increase in expenditure on either front for special education or transportation, I think it's completely speculative to say that at this point.
Oh, there you are. Yes, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to, I don't know if anyone else in the audience intends on testifying, but I don't think we're the first state, and I think we're actually one of the last states to be inventing this wheel. So, I would, if anyone in the audience can tell us how other states have tackled these issues, I think we can be enlightened. This is not new ground.
All right, any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
Chair, I'm curious about the new school, and forgive me for asking this question, but I'm curious, how are you paid right now, Mr. Bookman?
I can answer it if you want. It's a little less awkward, Mr. Chairman, if I answer that on his behalf. But the Cheyenne Classical Academy received a grant from the Daniels Fund And it utilizes that grant for that exact purpose.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. One more follow-up. How many kids are you planning on enrolling, and when will that start?
Mr.
Go
Chairman
ahead.
and Representative Conley, right now we have 285 students that were listed on the wait list. We're looking at opening in September of 2023, and there's a lot to do between now and then. And that's why we're here. Appreciate that.
Okay, anything else from this committee?
Just for, Mr. Chairman, for information, you know, it was back when we had our severe financial crash in the spring of 16, and then 17, we did a in-between cycle recalibration, and that's where we really made some changes to transportation. You know, I think the all-time transportation budget was 77 million back in 15, 16. It's 5 million less than that right now. So we're spending less than we were 5, 6 years ago, and a lot of that's from our work in 16 and 17. So I just think, you know, Cheyenne's operating with charter schools and the transportation is not an issue. Now we've got another charter school in Cheyenne. Why should it be an issue? I don't know. So, and I don't think special ed's an issue in Cheyenne with their current charter schools. Why now should it be an issue? I don't know. So I'm just wondering what problem we're trying to solve with this bill again. If it's kind of a solution in search of a problem. I don't know. I'm still waiting to be convinced, I guess, but thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I guess I don't want to crosstalk, but I am. Is the issue that there is no longer just the district as the authorizer? And so when the district was the authorizer, there was the obligation for this kind of negotiation that happened ahead of time. Is the problem that's attempted to be solved is that the district hasn't been part of the approval of a charter school within its boundaries? I don't know.
Anybody want to answer? Yes, go ahead.
I'll answer that, and as you know, I've been involved in the one up in Casper. The purpose of the charter school bill that we passed before with the slip board authorizing was to enable charter schools in districts where the district was opposed. And under those circumstances, you might have difficulties negotiating a deal. And so there's a fair amount of this is fail-safe.
Okay. All right, any further comments from the public? Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have one question for the headmaster, or maybe Representative Olson can elaborate on this. What have you got your numbers of your students that are coming in, or that are assigned to be able to come in, or that are asking to come in? What number of those students are outside of the district that have come in from outside, or are they all in-district students that were currently being taken care of by the state?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nyman, I'm actually really glad you answered that question. We had talked about the need to get that information out because what exists in our, based on our expressions of interest is slightly different than what the Legislative Service Office estimates. Somewhere between 80, just over 80% of our expressions of interest are inside of the Laramie County School District 1 system. The remainder percentage is Laramie County 2, Platte County 1, and then private and homeschool. So we expect that it would be a very minimal number in total that would be new students coming into the district. We feel very comfortable saying over 80% of the students are currently being serviced in Laramie County 1.
Go ahead.
That's what I was looking for, is to kind of give us a background. Is that we're going to have to expand or anything like that, or we're servicing students that are currently being taken care of in the system right now. So it's really not looking like it's going to be something that you're going to be running a long ways out of the way to get students that are not already being taken care of. So really the dollars should be very, very similar. So it would be in my mind.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and just, sorry, real quick, just a follow-up to that. And we testified to this information to the SLIB board. And for those of you, I don't know if this committee gets the school facilities reports or what, but a third of of school facilities in Laramie County are operating at 100% capacity. So not only are we servicing students who are currently in the system, which means there's no new dollars necessarily for that 80+%, but there's also a capacity issue in Laramie County, and this school provides a solution to that. So it's not just this school, but future schools. You can't build them fast enough in Laramie County, and I think that's just a problem we have in this county.
Mr. Co-Chair.
I do not know the specific figures for the Casper one. We are going to get some homeschool students in, whether it'll be as large as Cheyenne or larger, I do not know, but there will be some new students in the system that are currently being homeschooled. And I do know of at least one family, I think, expressed an interest that lives in the Glen Rock School District. And that's quite close to Casper. So that we may have at least one family from a district outside of Natrona County, but it's not going to be very large.
Okay, anything else for these folks? All right. Further public comment?
Here to help implement last year's new charter school bill. And Mr. Chairman and Senator Ellis, I just wanted to comment on how other states approach special education in particular. While the feds are only giving a certain part and the lion's share does go to the state, special education students are generating those funds based on their needs. So some students have needs such as, speech classes or fine motor skills training, while other students may have very severe special education needs that require more than just pull out a few hours a week. So I would just encourage you to look at special education funding and give charter school students the exact funds they are generating, so that appropriate services can be provided. Now, whether that's through the district and then through a contract or from the charter school itself, I think the option is important to maintain. Across the country, states approach it in very different ways. At the end of the day, special education is, there are so many requirements for using that funding, whether it's federal laws and regulations or state laws and regulations. There's no wiggle room when it comes to providing students with special education services that they need and deserve. So I would just ask you to look at that and to make sure that the funding that is generated by the student stays with the student, whether it's in a charter school, whether it's in a traditional public school. Again, we want to make sure that funding stays with the student. So I'm happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, questions from the committee. Representative Summers.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think most of our conversation was around the transportation
Right.
piece. So as you look at other states, it's kind of been my understanding that Wyoming was maybe the only state that reimburses transportation at 100%. We have a fairly unique model. So how does this transportation issue, how is it handled in other states with respect to charter schools that you've seen?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Summers, it's a mixed bag. I'm actually just completing a 46-state scan on charter school transportation, so it's sort of been in my head way too long. There are only 6 states that require in the law and provide 100% funding for special education. It's certainly, it's a complicated issue. Another 20 states require the local school district to transport students to a charter school that are, let me clarify that. There are about 22 states that require the local district to transport the charter school student if the student lives within the local district boundaries. So that would leave us, a little over 20 states whose laws are silent on transporting students, whether it's through funding or for responsibility. I would encourage you to look at transportation as an option, whether it's provided by the district or by the charter school, and to look at that funding generated again by the student. Now, just because a state mandates transportation funding does not mean a charter school always provides that funding. There's so many considerations: where the charter school is located, the relationship with the local district. Many times it depends on the authorizer, whether it's a statewide authorizer or a local district authorizer. So it really is very much a mixed bag. And Mr. Chairman and Representative Summers, last time I was up here testifying, I think that these are just all really great questions. And as a state, I thank you, well, as a legislature, I thank you for diving deep into these questions, because we have 3 new charter schools, the first ones that have opened in at least 10 years. So these types of conversations are putting the infrastructure in place for charter schools. So again, the line of questioning is, I applaud you for it. So I would just, again, encourage you to remember that these are public school students. So whatever the policy decision you make, we just want to make sure that we are setting charter schools up for success, and that students who choose to go to a charter school have that appropriate level of funding.
Okay, anyone else? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else to testify? Yes, please come forward.
Ken Clouston. I've been a member of the Campbell County School Board for 6 years. Also sit on the Budget Committee. And I just want to give a little background. When we looked at a charter school that was thinking about coming to Gillette, and the double counting of students, if 250 students leave Laramie County 1 for this charter school, Laramie County is going to lose about $4 million in funding. But those classes are going to be set up. The teachers are under contract. They're going to need a year to right size their classrooms. So I think the double counting of students is probably important, just to make sure the funding model's in place for Laramie County. That was my comment.
Okay, questions from the committee, comments? Yes, go ahead.
Congratulations,
Oh, thank you.
Mr. Representative.
Yeah, thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but don't we have a rolling average that as a student leaves a facility, then there is a reduced amount that is 2/3 of that, I believe, that goes to the district the first year after the student's gone, and then the third year, then they get 1/3 of that dollar, which helps to ease into, not just jerking the money away from them. So in effect, a student would leave one facility, let's say he wants to go from Lingle to Cheyenne. That student then would add on to the ADMs in Cheyenne, but also still be funded by the state for 2/3 of what he was being funded for in Lingle for that first year. And then the next year, that would be reduced by 1/3 again. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the way that is set up to help the districts to be able to assimilate that loss in student, and then the other districts to be able to assess that or to take that on. So that would be is that kind of what you're concerned about, or that they would have some, not just being jerked away from them, but it's being slow rolled away from them and allowing them to kind of adjust over the next 2 to 3 years, I believe, so.
Yeah, my concern is the school board members, if we lost 250 students all at once, those teachers are already under contract. We're not going to be able to change classrooms, right? We're going to have the same number of teachers, classrooms, administrators. It would take us a year to adjust how we set up those classrooms and to right size each school. So it was the funding for the Laramie County that I really had a concern about.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, let me just kind of give a little bit of clarity here. The charter schools, if they open and the students are contained in that same district, those students will be adjusted for by the Department of Education, so they're not triple counted. In Representative Nyman's case where you're crossing school districts, you are correct. A district who loses a student to another district will have that student's ADM adjusted downward. In the district that receives a student will have that student counted. But let me just give maybe a simple example. In Laramie 1, let's say 250 students enroll in the new charter school here in Cheyenne. That enrollment will be double counted. However, the Department of Education's rules ensure that students don't get triple counted in that case because they wouldn't be counted at their school that they're leaving. They'd be counted in the school that they're opening, or the new school that's being funded for the first year of operation, which is being double counted. Does that make sense? So you wouldn't want to have a situation where they're being resourced at their old school, and then they're being resourced at the charter school that opens up, and they're being double counted in that charter school for the first year. That'd be 3 times. So the Department of Education has rules to operationalize even a new school that's not a charter school, just a green school that opens up in the school. And when that opens, they adjust the students that leave those old schools and come into the new school, so there isn't a double counting situation. I hope that offers some clarity.
Okay, that help? All right, anyone else like to testify? Oh, go ahead.
Can I just, and I don't want to offend anybody, I just want to clarify what Mr. Wilmar said. So, for example, in Cheyenne, if a student went from East High School to Central High School, there's not a 3-year step down at East, doesn't get a counting. Originally, that was the way back 20 years ago, and it got corrected quickly. But this is different. Goes from East High School to the new charter school, will not be counted at East High School. They're still in the same district, but will be counted really twice at the charter school.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Harshman, that's correct for the first year. And then they'll be counted as
Right.
one student the second and subsequent years.
There is no 2/3, 1/3, 3-year step down, like if the student moved from Cheyenne East High School to Pine Bluffs. That's a different deal. They left the district.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Yeah.
The adjustment within the district is the only instance where those inter-district transfers are accounted for.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Just for my clarification then, if they were to move inside the district, which they would be double counted in that case, but according to the way this is written, they would only have a value of 80% of the cost if they went into a charter school, leaving the public, which they're both indeed public schools, and they're staying in the district. Those dollars stay within they stay within the district. They're both public schools, both being funded, but this child going into the charter school would then be funded at 80% of what they were previously funded at the previous school.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nyman, the 80% is an instance that it is a SLIB-approved charter school, and the charter school and the district cannot come to an agreement. However, the 80% would contemplate still a double enrollment count. So it wouldn't necessarily be 80% less than what they were currently receiving. They would still have the double enrollment count.
Okay, anyone else like to testify? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If 250 students were to leave that school, would that school still have funding based on the previous year?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Andrew, let's just take an extreme example. Let's say an elementary school had 250 students, and it was the district school, and those 250 students now enroll into a charter school. My interpretation of the department's rules, they would adjust that previous school's enrollment. They would reduce that by the 250 students. The charter school would be resourced at 500 students for the first year, and they'd be funded 250 students. But that would be you know, a charter school that would not be initiated by a school district, but either authorized by a charter school or authorized by a school district or authorized by the SLIB.
But if, thank you, Mr. Chairman, but if we did what Representative, can't even think of it, Olson, man alive, I got so many things thrown around in my mind. If we did change the statute, which they said they were fine with that, then it would just be one. And we would not allow the double funding for that first year. So it would feasibly, it would be just the same, it'd be a wash. Okay.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Representative Nyman's.
Okay. All right. Anyone else like to testify? Please come forward.
My name is Keith Miller. I'm on the board of the Prairie View Community School in Chugwater. I just want to point out something that may be overlooked here today. Our charter school is not of the same character or in the same environment that the schools in Cheyenne and Casper. Ours is in a rural community where the students have long distances to travel. Without district support for that, it's going to be a real burden on the parents to bring those children to the charter school. One of the reasons for our charter school is there's been an exodus of students from the public education system in Platte County School District 1 to the point where the facilities are being underutilized. The students are there. The students are in southeast Wyoming. And what we're seeing is that our school, with its revised education model, is in fact attracting a good deal of new students into the district. That fact changes the dynamics. It changes the economic, the calculation of the costs of education. In fact, we think that's going to streamline and create a more efficient system, and in fact will continue to bring students who are currently being homeschooled, which is a very high percentage in southeast Wyoming, back into the public education system, which is a benefit to the students. Homeschooled parents realize that their students are not getting all of the benefits that they would get in a central public school. So I want to just advise you that not all three of the chartered schools chartered by SLIB are identical in their character or in their operation. We are somewhat counter to what you've heard today. We are not drawing from a dearth or an excess of students from a school district that has high educational demands on it. We are drawing from a group of parents and students who want a choice in their education system, and in fact have already left the public education environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
So am I right in understanding that the transportation element in this bill, where you get some additional negotiating power with the school district on that, may be critically important to your charter school?
Yes, it would, sir. Mr. Chairman.
Okay, yes. Representative Nyman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your area down there, do you currently have a school in Chugwater?
Yes, there is a public school.
And they are currently doing bus routes and they're bringing kids to the school. Are there any, from the students that you have that are proposed to enroll in your school, are they far beyond the reach of the current routes? Or are they pretty much on the current routes that would be able to utilize the buses that are actually running right now if you can work something out with the district? Because I ask this question because in my area, we allow school choice from the standpoint of between Hewlett, Sundance, and Moorcroft. We literally have kids get on in Moorcroft, Wyoming, and come to Hewlett while they meet kids going from Hewlett to Moorcroft or Sundance. And we drop them off at certain points and we address it and we shoot everybody to wherever they want to go to school in District 1. And that's my curiosity in this. If you've already got routes going by and they're coming to a central location, that would not be anything that's going to require something that's outside of what is currently being offered, like longer distances or anything like that? Or do you have a way of assessing that as far as who is planning on enrolling?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Neiman, the number of bus routes in School District Number 1, Platte County School District Number 1, in our area have been decreasing over the last number of years. I believe that it's probably 1/3 the number of buses being utilized that there was 6 years ago. I'm not exactly sure of that number, but it's much less. I think there's only 3 bus routes now, with only a few children on each bus. So in answer to your question, there would have to be new bus routes to bring in, to gather the children from the areas which are not being served now.
Okay, yes. Let's go to Representative Conley first, and then we'll come back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just pulled up your website, and I believe it's Dr. Miller, right, from looking at your website right here. And one of your FAQs is, what about busing? And the answer to it is, not sure yet, we're in the middle of negotiations. So could you tell us a little bit about the kind of discussions and negotiations that you're having with the district right now?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Conley, we've had one discussion with the superintendent of Platte County School District 1 concerning busing, nutrition, and special ed. The initial response is we do not have the staff to support that. That as though the charter school is going to have to provide our own resources to handle those special ed. Plus, during the hearings at SLIB, we were told that the reimbursable funds by state charter or state statute are not available to charter schools. And that was my understanding. Senator Driscoll said that that would get changed, would get corrected, so that charter schools were allowed to be reimbursed for special ed and those activities. And that's what I understood the purpose of this bill was to be. Exactly how that gets implemented, I don't know. Our current negotiations, we expect to reopen those negotiations now that the school has been chartered. We still need those services, and I can't tell you how that negotiation will go. We have our first session on Monday, and we are looking forward to that.
Follow up?
So Dr. Miller, from sitting here and listening today, I think you've heard, and I think we're all very clear that children with special needs and under IEPs will get them, and they're 100% reimbursable, that is something that will happen. Also, that we provide transportation for school children. So I'm curious, do you see a need for the bill in front of us? And if so, what portions of it make sense to you?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Conley, I have not been able to place this bill in proper perspective with the rest of the statutes and with the current operating system. I do know that for schools chartered by the state through SLIB, what we're being told by the Department of Ed is we have to go negotiate all these items on our own with the school district. It's reassuring to hear that those services for disabled children and for transportation to charter schools will be somehow covered. We're not sure how how to approach that in our negotiation with the school district, unless we simply say, the statutes say those services must be provided. If we're not reimbursed as a charter school for those services, then our budgets can't handle that.
Okay. Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for that perspective because I come from a rural district. And I have a lot of parents who are also thinking and engaging in homeschool or alternatives. And I want you to know I will carry your words with me in the months ahead. And I appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay, anyone else? Go ahead.
So how many students are, and you're located right in Chugwater?
We expect our facility will be in Chugwater. There are facilities available that were used by the traditional school that have been mothballed. There's also some view that the current school, which is the mid-school, high school, a new facility, when our charter school begins, there's enough dissatisfaction with the current education program there that something like 90% of those students currently attending the traditional school will come to the charter school. Ours is a project-based charter school, which has been utilized in other states, Colorado in particular, for rural areas, and have been very successful in preparing their students, not only for college entry, but for employment within the state.
Sure. How many, Mr. Chairman, how many students are you projecting then, are you?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, we currently have letters of intent for 74 students. We have let the parents in the region know that our initial enrollment the first year will be limited to 120 because that's all the facility can support.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thanks for being here today.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, thank you. Anyone else like to testify?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
could I ask Jed Ciccarelli?
sure.
Sorry, Jed, you come to a meeting, you might have to testify some more. I just want to, he's, I think, probably got a unique perspective. You remember his previous job was at,
Right.
was across so here at the Hathaway building. But my question really is this. I mean, these are public school kids. And it's all, we're talking about reimbursables now. We know that Wyoming, 100% transportation costs. The district puts the bill in, the state pays it according to the rules. It's not unlimited, right? All the routes and the purchasing of buses, all that stuff's controlled through rulemaking. But the same is also true of special ed, right? I mean, it's 100% reimbursable according to rules. It's not everything. You can't go buy an airplane and get it reimbursed, but it's, so how do you make this work in Cheyenne now with your current charter schools? How do these two issues work?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, how we've made the reimbursable component work is really kind of twofold. The first is on the transportation side, our charter dictates the terms of how we administer that funding, how they adhere to the state rules and regs and statutes, what happens if they deviate. But for the most part, we have to provide a significant amount of oversight in the sense that we talked earlier about the state's staffing regulations for special education. We still provide input and direction to the charter schools on when it's appropriate to add another special education one-on-one para. If they need another related service provider, we're a part and collaborative team member of that decision-making process. And so that's how we've been able to utilize it. I mentioned earlier, Representative Harshman, that the mechanics, the funding mechanics of it are cumbersome. We can't simply take the charter school staff and report them as eligible staff members and receive reimbursement. Ideally, that's the way the process would work. But what we have to do is we have to pay the charter school as a contract to pay their staff and then we turn around and ask the state for reimbursement on a contract. So it adds some layers of complexity. But I think the key, Mr. Chairman and Representative Harshman, is that we work with those schools, but we have a tool and a mechanism to do that, and that's the charter. We have had instances where we've had difficulties in administering those reimbursable components because of data reporting timeliness and accuracy, but we have the charter to enforce some timelines and some punitive measures if they're not met. We don't have that toolbox. And so we have to figure out how we're going to work through that, being the entities that they're not accountable to going forward.
So, Mr. Chairman, so in the end, I mean, on these special education services and the transportation, I mean, do you just roll your charter schools into your bus, first question, into your whole bus network, kind of, that's another stop?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, we designate a specific route for our charter school. It serves both charter schools. So we do have designated staff that are drivers. In certain instances, if we have a student who has an individualized transportation plan, we'll have a transportation aide. But we also have extracurricular activities and state athletics that we have to work with the charter school specifically for their events. And so we have other staff, our staff members, that will cover those other activity routes as necessary. And Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, to the point earlier about staffing concerns, we struggle with the same things. There are some times that we're not able to accommodate the charter schools because we can't find the bus drivers to work those activity routes and those type of things too. So it's all a part of a collaborative working process with our transportation department.
Right, and that's happening there. I know in my little job, I mean, we're canceling events because you can't get a driver. But, okay, so then the next question, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for, the special ed part, to provide those services. And I guess, is it similar? I mean, you go through the same, maybe explain that. I think I understand now the transportation. You pay and then get it reimbursed kind of as a contract. Special ed similar then?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, it is. I would be remiss to tell you I'm not a special education expert, but we do have a similar process where our staff understand that we can't delegate our FAPE requirements without having a clear indication of another entity as an LEA. So we know we have oversight of the special education program. It's inherent. It's our responsibility. So we do work with the two charter schools teams on developing IEPs, ensuring that the services are provided, making sure that our staffing is commensurate with the needs of the students. So there is a lot of work. In some instances, we still provide our related service providers. If it's more economical, or if they're not able to find a speech path or something like that, we'll still work out a process that they can access our staff members. But again, it's all kind of the development process and the charter renewal process that we go through, and we've clearly laid this out well in advance of renewals or the charters. We still haven't had those conversations with the new charter school, and that's where we're concerned.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, the last question I really have then is, I mean, if in the end, for your current charter schools that you have charters with, the public school kids in the public charter, in the end, your locally elected school board is responsible. I mean, in the end, your staff and to make sure these special education services, transportation services are provided. And I guess as we move into now a SLIB granted charter, in the end, though, will it still be the elected school board members of Laramie County that'll be, in the end, responsible to make sure these special education services are provided? I guess that's my question, I guess. I want to know, in the end, who's responsible if it doesn't work out or some kid just doesn't come down? Is it the SLIB board? Is it the appointed board of the charter, or is it the elected members of the Laramie County School Board?
Go ahead. Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, under our current charter and our current agreement with our schools, our district is responsible. I think this bill intends to help direct at least some of that responsibility towards the charter schools. I think this discussion that we had a few meetings back really kind of focused on, the responsibilities to provide special education services. And the Office of Special Education Services with U.S. Department of Education contemplates charter schools having some responsibility if they're designated as an LEA. And I think that's what partially this bill is intended to address.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One quick question for Representative Olson, if he'd be willing to indulge me. Very quick. I think I've heard a couple of us ask, is this bill necessary? And I'm trying to figure that out as well. And so, is this bill necessary? And if so, why?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Salazar, that's a question probably that each charter school would have a different response to. I would say there's two reasons for this bill. And Representative Harshman just hit the nail on the head. Actually, it's the answer to his questions. If you want accountability to rest with the charter school for providing special, if you leave the bill as it is, special education services and transportation, then you're resting accountability with the charter school. So the bill would be necessary to do that. If you are concerned about students receiving special education, having their needs met, the bill is not necessary to accomplish that. A charter school authorized alternatively outside of the district would operate under a dual enrollment with the school district, with the local school that student would have went to, that's going to a charter school, in order to make sure they're receiving the special education funding, and the state is still ultimately responsible for that. So I think it just comes down to Senator Salazar responsibility, and then if you flip that on its head, from the charter school's perspective, it's control. So I think charter schools would welcome this bill because they would like to have that responsibility, and they would like to have that control, and possibly leave the district out of it. That would be the reason why a charter school chose to be authorized outside of the district. For example, we just heard testimony about transportation issues. That's with a charter school that has to rely on the school district to help solve its problem. A charter school who sought an authorization from the SLIB board is trying to solve as many of the problems as it can on its own, and then rely on its partner with the school district when it needs to. So I think it's a matter of perspective.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm still trying to think through the special education piece of this. So the district comes and they say, here's the services that we have, and we're going to incorporate you into our program and our personnel, and it fits into our program. But the charter school under this bill says, you know what, we don't really like your personnel. We're going to hire our own. And by the way, you're going to reimburse us 100% for it. Is that a potential scenario with this bill?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermuller, I think the example might look more like this. There's a special education need that needs to be met. Say it's with reading comprehension, for example. And in that child's IEP, the team members include the parents, they include special education teachers, the teacher, and those special education teachers are probably coming from the district in that scenario. And maybe there's a differing opinion between the parents and the homeschool, that's the charter school, and the special education teacher who's a district employee. And the difference of the opinion is simply whether you try to solve the issue inside the classroom by keeping the student in the classroom and providing supports, or you remove the student from the classroom and then have to bring them to that special education teacher who's not at the charter school. They're somewhere located in the district. That's the likely scenario that I see. And in that scenario, what this bill would do is give more control to the charter school because it may ultimately have its own special education teacher. It may in the facility. And so having more of a partnership between the parent and the principal or headmaster of the charter school to decide whether they should be in the needs of that student outside of the district influence. That's the scenario that I really see that what this bill fundamentally changes. Right now, this system already operates for private schools. If a private school has a special education student need, and they do, let's say it's speech pathology, and they don't have a speech pathologist at the private school, then what they do, if the parent wants the student to receive speech pathology services, they dual enroll the student with its home school in the district, and they provide those services. It's up to the district to determine whether that speech pathologist is going to go to the school or not, or whether they're going to stay at the facility that they're located, and your student is going to be removed from the classroom and taken over to the speech pathologist and lose classroom time. That's already a system that occurs. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, but I think that's more than a hypothetical. That's a reality that currently exists.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I would add to that explanation that in the scenario that he gave us, where it's a reading issue, and you do have a disagreement between the charter school and the parents and the original school district. What goes on is there are, I don't know, it's over 100 different systems for teaching reading. And school districts typically have adopted a particular system. The charter school is likely to have a different system. It's probably one of the fundamental reasons the charter school is there. So you might well have a circumstance where the parents and the charter school want to use the charter school's own system for teaching reading to that special ed kid who they hope to bring along eventually into the classrooms and into the regular system in the charter school. So you could very well have a difference of opinion, and this bill will straighten that out.
Okay, go ahead.
Briefly, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but Mr. Co-Chairman, Representative Olson, so last year around this time, 4 of us went down on this committee to Colorado and toured some charter schools. And when we talked yesterday about how do we get more higher education degrees in people's hands, I can tell you we went to one charter school there, a high school, where 75% of their graduates either had a certificate or their associate's degree and were ready for the workforce. So hold that thought. But one thing that we heard was, what happens if a school is not fulfilling its promise and it's failing and it's struggling, a charter school? And very clearly they said, well, it should close. I mean, these are not things that we want to put on life support and keep trying to pump energy into if they're not performing. And so that was something we heard over and over again, is if a charter school is not delivering on its promise, it should close. But I think the only way you get there is if you make them the clearly accountable entity. And so I think what this bill is seeking to do, at least in my opinion, is really holding them accountable and not trying to fold them under this public system or public school or regime that we have right now, where if it's failing, then we're going to put them on a performance plan. I mean, just all of those things that just don't work. I think that that's what we're trying to get after, is something a little different. So I just wanted to be clear. I mean, is that how you see this bill as being necessary? Is if these charter schools in Wyoming, the 3 that we've authorized through a statewide authorizer, aren't performing and they're not what we like, they close. Is that a fair assessment of how you think it should be working?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, 100%. And I think I think because you do have different types of charter schools, you probably have a differing opinion on this. When it comes to the compliance with special education, we're dealing with a lot of federal law. And I can speak to the Casper Charter School and the Cheyenne Charter School, who use an education service provider that has staff and expertise to help keep the school in compliance with accountability. I can't speak to Chugwater's ability to do that. I think the mom and pop, and I don't mean that offensively, type charter school like Chugwater is probably at a disadvantage to be the LEA and be accountable, because they're going to have to spend dollars on an attorney and on experts to make sure they are accountable under those federal standards. I think, again, Cheyenne and Casper are in a whole different boat because the education service provider already deals with that with hundreds of schools across the country. But at the end of the day, if I could sum up the need for this bill, it's to empower the charter school, but it's more importantly, it makes them accountable. And I believe that's very accurate.
Okay. Anyone else like to testify? Yes, we have one more.
Shelley Hamill with Wyoming Department of Education. I'm sorry, this is probably out of order since it's not truly just public testimony, but I wanted to clarify that part of the reason that we suggested at a previous JEIC to grapple with the idea of charter schools being an LEA goes beyond just who's providing those services. There are a lot of nuances in special education, some that we've heard about today, that I won't dive into deeply just to be respectful of time, but the private school students are private school students. They don't participate in special education at the school district. There is a proportionate share that a district is required to calculate for students that are special education students that if they were enrolled in a public school system would have rights to services. But the school district looks at all of those private schools as a whole and then decides where that small amount of funding is going to do the most good. That probably doesn't have a place in this conversation because we're talking about public charter schools. We really think that the cleanest way for the special education process to play out is for charter schools to be recognized as an LEA, not may. The wording in the proposed bill says may, and that would allow the charter school to choose whether they wanted to be recognized as an LEA or not. But there are responsibilities that the SEA has, the WDE, as the state educational agency overseeing those federal funds, through, and I think you've heard us talk about monitoring our responsibilities in relation to other bills. When a school district is found out of compliance or in need of corrective action for a specific, for something that is not in alignment with IDEA, the WDE works with that LEA, that school district, to create a corrective action plan. We have a lot more leverage and authority to work with an LEA than we would necessarily an independent public school, charter school that's sitting within a school district. It would be really much more cumbersome and complicated to hold the school district accountable for the charter school if the differences are lying between those two. Anyway, I'm hoping that casts some light on, I think that's probably the cleanest way is for the charter school to be the LEA, and then we work with that charter school's board if there's a need for corrective action through the monitoring.
Sure.
I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Representative Harshman.
Mr. Chairman, and that kind of keeps bringing me around to this point. I mean, if there's a school that you're having to deal with, it's the school trustees in this community that are at the end responsible, elected by the people. And what you're saying then, if we make these charters that are SLIB charters, ELAs, then who are the elected officials that are responsible? I mean, we have the 5 electeds that granted the charter.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Harshman, I think that's certainly a complication, one that I'm probably not prepared to speak to because we do look at an LEA often with the elected officials, but I think we heard earlier today that there's not necessarily a state definition of an LEA that requires that elected official. I'm not sure. I'm probably not the right person to answer that, but I believe that each of the charter schools does have a board.
So that board, Mr. Chairman, that board would be responsible then for the
Mr.
special
Chairman.
education services.
And Representative, I believe that it would be. That was our concern initially, was that the SLIB is not necessarily an appropriate entity to hold accountable for corrective actions or the implementation of FAPE. They wouldn't have those processes in place to be able to oversee corrective action if that were necessary.
Usually when you, Mr. Chairman, when you give authority, you have accountability with it too. And I think that's where we missed the boat last year. We gave some authority, but no accountability with the SLIB. So we're in this kind of weird space trying to figure it out. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, we've heard this argument now a couple of times. I just want to offer, most states that have a statewide authorizer create like a separate commission of some sort. So your statewide authorizer isn't composed of elected officials. So I just want to get away from this notion that that's how it worked. We picked that as a compromise for this little pilot project of ours. So I think a lot of us who supported the idea of using the SLIB was a proxy to work through some of these issues. But, certainly Representative, if you wanted to move to a more permanent statewide authorizing entity that we create through statute, that sounds like a great next step.
Mr. Chairman, I think that'd be interesting, like the 49th school district, and make the SLIB the school board of it. Be interesting.
Okay. Thank you. Any more testimony? All right, thank you all for your testimony. It certainly has been enlightening. I'm sure we've gathered a lot of information from this committee. They can't accuse us of not vetting a bill thoroughly, because we've certainly done that today. So where are we? Are we ready to move forward with this? Yes.
Move the bill.
Bill has been moved. Is there a second? Okay, moved and seconded.
Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion by the committee? Yes.
Move to amend the bill to add to the repealer section that piece of the statute that Mr. Wilmar cited to us that leads to the double enrollment counting.
Second.
Okay, everybody familiar with exactly what the amendment says?
And Mr. Chairman, we had time to review that. There is that subparagraph C that I discussed. There's also another paragraph that needs to be repealed. It'd be 21.3.314A3, and we'll repeal both of those provisions to effectuate that amendment.
And Mr. Chairman, I've looked at the title. It says modifying charter school funding, and that's perfectly, we don't need to change the title.
And Mr. Chairman, if you allow us the ability, if we missed any other conforming amendment, to make that amendment as well.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, that's fine.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, let me first disclose, and I think the committee knows it. I've been a member of the board at the charter school up in Casper. I'm in the process of leaving, but I'm still at this point a member of that, and I wanted to make sure the committee knew that. And on the substance of the amendment, frankly, when we wrote the charter school bill, we did not know that this provision existed. I suspect it's a relic of a previous funding system that we have run well past, but I can't prove that. But I don't see the need for it. If there is a cash flow problem because of what I'm recommending, we can fix that during session. I don't think there will be, but there could be. Frankly, I don't see the need for the double enrollment counting, and I think we're better off without it. And I think that'll clean up some of the projections as to how much charter schools are going to cost.
Okay, any other comments or questions about the amendment? Question's been called on the amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, no. Okay, the amendment's carried. Back on the bill. Representative Obermueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to admit I had a hard time following some of the testimony today. Did anybody testify against this bill?
Well, I don't remember anyone testifying against the bill.
Public testimony against this?
Certainly, we had plenty of opportunity to tweak it, I think, but
not. Okay, thank you.
I haven't heard any real opposition to it. All right. Are you ready for the question? Yes, go ahead.
I just want to maybe throw this out as a placeholder. On page 2, we did hear testimony from the department about LEAs and the fact that if we're doing this path that, line 5 allows a charter school to choose whether or not they'll be an LEA. Given the fact that we've got 3 that we authorized in our pilot bill, 2 indicating that they, I think, would like to be an LEA, but we didn't hear testimony from that third entity. I would just say, I'm inclined to leave it as it is right now, and we can look at this issue, and if we had to revisit it during the session and change the may to a shall, and then other conforming amendments, that might be appropriate, but I just wanted to acknowledge that I didn't hear that suggestion, and I've been trying to sort through the path forward, but we haven't heard from that third school that might be impacted, so I just want to give that a little more thought.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Co-Chair.
And we did hear some testimony from someone who's not from that charter school, that the LEA might be a real complication for a charter school as small as the Chugwater one. So I think that reinforces leaving it the way it is.
Okay. Yes, Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And because the good co-chair, or, actually, that good Representative Obermuller asked if there was any testimony against the bill. My reason for voting no on the bill are all of these questions that were just raised right now. If there is ever, and I hate to use something that we've used in the legislature forever, but if there is ever a bill not ready for prime time, it could be this right here. That it seems to me every element of it needs some tweaking to it. And just look at how much conversation we had in order to understand, honestly, a very already in statute kind of understanding regarding special ed, right? That to me was an easy one, and we probably spent an hour and a half on it. The relationship of these new charter schools with districts is something I think we have to think about a whole lot more. And for that reason, I'm going to vote no, because this bill just isn't ready. Maybe someone can figure out these issues by the time we get to session, but until then, this isn't the vehicle for me.
Okay. Any other comments or?
Well, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Not to delay our last day here, but I just, there's something missing. This needs to somehow roll into then we either say, okay, local districts, you didn't authorize them, but they're yours now, the SLIB did. And you're going to work with them and they're going to be a local charter, just like your current charter schools. Now, I'm not sure how a local school district would like that, for the legislature to force that on them, but I think something, either that or the SLIB, or the WDE, somebody needs to make this work. It works better, I think, as a local charter, and then we bring all this transportation, special ed services to bear, because they're kids in our community. I mean, they're the same kids. And, but anyway, I don't know if there's a way to do that with this bill. If it survives this vote, I'm going to work on it in the coming month and try to make that happen. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, on that point, the way the underlying law is structured here, the new law, there's an incentive for both the charter school and the district to get together and work together, because we think that'll work best. But there are fail-safe provisions in case that is unable to occur, frankly, because the district is just flat opposed to the charter school, what we're afraid of. Well, so we're doing it on an incentive basis rather than a mandatory one.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, fair enough. And it could be a lot of things in negotiations. You never know unless you're in the middle of that. I mean, it could, but fair enough. But in the end, somebody's got to kind of be accountable. Thank you.
Well, there's a good reason that that's a long drawn out process to pass a bill. It goes through a lot of different stages and steps. And once if this does pass the initial test, I think there'll be some time to give some thought to exactly what you just expressed. And those of you that are still be standing here will probably have an opportunity to manipulate this in some way to address those concerns. So with that, any other? Okay, question's been called. Roll call, please.
Mr. Chairman, on 23 LSO-0246, Charter School Amendments as amended, Senator Beitman. Senator Ellis. Senator Rothfuss.
Excused, I guess, isn't he? Yep.
Senator Salazar. Representative Andrew. Representative Brown left a vote of aye. Representative Connolly. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman. Representative Newsom. Representative Obermuller. Representative Summers. Co-Chairman Scott.
Aye.
Chairman Paxton.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 8 ayes, 4 noes, and 1 excused.
Okay, the bill passes.
9, sorry, I apologize, 9 ayes. I forgot to count Representative Brown's.
We got a little long-winded on that last bill, and we are beyond the break. What's your pleasure? Should we continue with our next presentation, or do you want to take a break now?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to suggest we take a break now, if that's all right with you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, at the break, we're planning to invite you to come next door to the break room, and we have a little presentation to make, and we have little refreshments, and the audience is welcome to join us. The break will run a little long, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so how long should the break be? 15 minutes, or would that long enough?
20 minutes.
All right, 20-minute break. There's my pen. Okay, it looks like we have a quorum. Thanks to everybody who worked on giving me my very, very good send off, and we got all sugared up, and we ought to, the afternoon ought to go really fast. So everybody ought to be talking really, really fast right now, huh? All right, the next item on our agenda is Wyoming Teacher Apprenticeship Program, and we have two presenters here for us today that are going to enlighten us about the program. So please introduce yourself and we'll.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, committee, I am Brendan O'Connor, the Executive Director of the Professional Teaching Standards Board. And with me is Dr. Laurel Ballard from the Department of Education. She's getting her presentation set up.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm excited to be here. Just kind of a reminder, the Department of Ed and PTSB started this project back in March of this year. We've been developing the K-20 apprenticeship since March, and then in June, I think we gave you kind of a high-level update because it was still really new at that point. Not sure what more that we knew than other than we were going to do this in 3 phases. So we, on October 19th, which about 7 months later, the Department of Ed and the U.S. Department of Labor signed the apprenticeship standards, which actually granted approval of Wyoming's K-12 teacher registered apprenticeship program. So huge, for us, it's a huge deal. I think it took the first state to do this about 18 months, and I really appreciate them figuring out the way because we definitely use that to help us out. So, all right, why apprenticeship in Wyoming? Why are we even looking at this? So it's really a type of grow your own, right? It is all about taking folks that are already in a community, giving them skills, giving them training, giving them the college courses, all of those kinds of things to be able to be really successful teachers. I believe your own consultants talked about this last meeting, when they were talking about looking at teacher retention and recruitment efforts. This is one of the things they've talked about is grow your own programs. For us, I think it will help provide a cohesive and collaborative effort and teacher shortage, especially since it's impacting all teachers. We also believe that we are taking advantage of what we know is already strong in this state, right? We know we have instructional facilitators and coaches and mentors that are strong. We have very strong teachers. The University of Wyoming has been developing the Teacher Mentor Corps, which could help train our mentors and support the mentors that are a part of this. There are lots of benefits that go with this, right? So if we look at school districts, right, it gives them the opportunity to grow within their own district and community so they can value and take people that are interested and have been not able to become a part of the teaching profession who may have wanted to because they can't leave the community, they can't afford post-secondary education. So this also gives them access to financial resources and support they wouldn't have otherwise. It allows them to help transfer knowledge from the mentors to the apprentices. It really gives them an opportunity, right? To take the mentors and mold these apprentices to become teachers over the course of 3 years, right? So we have heard sometimes at the department that the University of Wyoming doesn't always train our teachers quite the way they want them as they come out. And so then they're doing additional support and training. And so it really gives districts an opportunity to take 3 years to mold them into the kinds of teachers that they want. If there's education that they may, or things they want them to learn that the university or colleges or wherever they are isn't providing to them, it gives them an opportunity to help teach them some of those things. It gives them an opportunity to teach things like classroom management, which is really hard to do until you're in a classroom. There's also benefits for apprentices, right? So they get 3 years of mentorship inside a classroom with a mentor teacher, which is much more than the semester plus the practicums that the students that are in teacher prep programs receive. They get financial support in the form of progressive wages. So they're paid for their time in the classroom. They also, that increases over time with their knowledge and skills increasing. They can receive funding for the coursework and the tuition fees, and then access to the retirement system, so they have benefits that they may not receive otherwise. It also gives them the ability to learn without having to relocate. They don't have to go to the University of Wyoming or anywhere else, that it's designed for them to receive the college courses in their district so that they don't have to leave and move. And then it really creates a minimal learning curve as they reach into the teaching profession. So it really gives them a chance to hit the ground running. So Wyoming did a approach called what they called a sponsored apprenticeship. The Department of Education is the sponsor. So there's two ways you could do the apprenticeship. We can create the sponsored apprenticeship, and then the school districts become the employers. So we take on, when we do that, it allows us to do a couple things. It allows us to create and enforce minimum requirements associated with the apprenticeship program. It also takes some of the bureaucratic burden off of the school districts. The other option is that school districts could apply to the U.S. Department of Labor on their own and create their own apprenticeship program. And really, this doesn't stop districts from doing that if they don't want what we provide. So in this model, the school districts then are the employers. So they are responsible for owning this program, executing it, make sure it's done well and done right. They provide jobs to the apprentices. They oversee all of their training and development. They provide the hands-on learning that we always have with apprenticeship programs. And then they support the apprentices as they go through the program of study. So a lot of times they'll create a cohort of apprentices and making sure, some of these people haven't been in school for quite some time. And so just giving them some of those supports that they may need as they go through this. We're doing this as a three-phase approach. And so we're in phase one. So we are looking at how we support folks that are already employed in a district and have a post-secondary degree. We're looking for an AA, a bachelor's. The idea is we want those general eds kind of taken care of. And so when they're coming in, what they're really doing is getting their, going straight into the teacher prep program. And then phase two, we'll be looking at what happens, how do we do this when they don't have a degree already? So we also have to work on gen ed requirements, not just the teacher prep pieces. And then phase three is actually kind of going back into the CTE world, right? And bringing the apprenticeship down into the high schools, whether we do it as a expanded version of the apprenticeship or a pre-apprenticeship.
Okay, so there's 5 components to the apprenticeship. First is, as Dr. Ballard mentioned, these apprentices are enrolled in a teacher preparation program. And so they are not the teacher of record right out the bat. We heard that was a concern out in the field initially, that they thought they were just going to be hiring these people, and what about all of the teachers that went through their programs, have kind of paid their dues, so to speak, and have learned their craft and are working. This is a long-term solution, and one, again, for retention purposes and recruitment purposes, especially in some of the districts that we have selected for the pilot program, where housing may be an issue. These individuals are already in those communities. They aren't bringing in a 23-year-old to Shoshone, Wyoming, and you got the pit stop, and that's maybe about it there. So really growing up educators from those communities who are already invested in those. So they will complete a preparation program that matches any other preparation program, as Dr. Ballard just mentioned. Not only does the University of Wyoming maybe doesn't capture everything that all the local districts desire for their educators to know, they just can't simply produce enough to meet the need. So while UW is our primary target for the Ed Prep program, we have designed the standards and the competencies that the apprentices will master to be completed through any number of approved and accredited preparation providers across the nation, so that we've got common standards that are already common nationwide. We haven't invented anything new. We're just using what is existing. We're using evaluation tools that are used in districts in Wyoming right now for those on the ground, on the job training and those competency pieces that you don't get in the classroom work. You only can demonstrate once you're in those classes. As we've talked about the mentorship as well, UW does have the Mentor Core program that they're just starting off. This is their inaugural year for that. There's been teacher mentors forever. And so this is a method of using that leadership that's in the buildings already, those master teachers, to grow up the next generation, to really provide those supports and stabilize these new educators in their craft as they're coming in. And so it also, in school hierarchies, there's limited levels that you can go up, especially if you don't want to leave the classroom. You either are a teacher forever or you get into administration. So this provides a next step up that the districts can recognize you are a strong teacher. We want to help you raise up the next strong teachers. As they complete their programs, all of the programs will be already vetted through Professional Teaching Standards Board, so that as the apprentices complete their college courseworks and their degree work, it will already lead to licensure. So there isn't going to be any hiccups at the end. They'll already have met our requirements. They've gone through, they've got the degree, they've got the experience, they've met all testing requirements as well. I believe that's, yes. And so finally, they'll have completed all of the requirements. They apply for full licensure. We work through that process. And then ideally, they would be hired by the districts. And again, this is a long-term process. As we've been working with these pilot districts, there are immediate needs that they are facing right now. But this, again, is a long-term. It's going to take them 2 to 3 years to get these apprentices completed through their programs. So we've been working with them to project where do you see your needs in a few years. Who's going to be retiring? Who do you need to bring in to replace that person? So they've kind of had to shift their mindset a little bit towards that while still trying to meet their immediate needs as well. And so they're also very excited about this opportunity that they've already, I think, have a few individuals identified who they think they would like to get as an apprentice, but they do have to open that up for any interested party.
Mr. Chairman, one of the things that we also hear too, or we heard from the field, is that this really is like a watered down, might be a watered down version. It's the fear that we've heard that's out there. So I just want to kind of highlight a couple of things. So when we think about the apprentices are going to be completing really the same program of study that somebody that is in teacher prep completes. So that's the same. These teachers also have to demonstrate competencies. So there's that Brendan just talked about, that teachers that are in the teacher prep programs don't have to do. They also get the opportunity when they're going through with the program of study to actually not just learn it, they then get to apply it almost immediately, right? So they have that opportunity to kind of see how it looks, see how it works, creates a whole new level of relevancy in what they're doing, rather than kind of going through school and then trying to apply it after the fact. The other thing that they have that teachers that are going through the teacher prep program really don't have is, so they have the on-the-job training. So the teacher prep programs, really that's like a semester plus a few practicums along the way that get them into the classroom. But they don't really do this until they're in their last semester. So the apprentices actually get to experience this and that gradual release to the becoming a teacher over 2-3 years, depending on where they're starting. So I just kind of wanted to point out, right, this is definitely not a watered down version. In fact, I would say that we have some requirements of apprentices that are not necessarily required in our teacher prep programs. We are doing this as a pilot to start off with. So we have 3 districts that we're working with. We did a small district, medium district, large district, to kind of see what the apprenticeship program looks like and how it works in these different settings. So we have Fremont 24, Teton at 1, and Laramie 1. that are participating. And what I'm giving you here is what they identified as their big staffing needs. And I will tell you, this has surprised us as we went through it. The places where there are the greatest exceptions, where they have to kind of help build and train people with PTSD, is in education, in elementary education, which is actually what we hear nationally. That is not what we heard from these districts. They definitely need more help in the secondary levels, more than they need. Like the elementary kind of fell to the bottom of their needs, if they even mentioned it at all.
Special education is also a need across all of these districts, and that is also addressed.
Oops, there we go. One of the things you asked in June was to kind of think about cost estimates. What does this program really cost if we do an apprenticeship program? And so I kind of give you the cost estimates for phase one. We did base this on, since we haven't fully implemented in our districts yet, we based the staffing needs on what was identified by Tennessee, who was the first state to do this. I did this just so as we look at the assumptions that are in there, as we look at the estimates, you kind of know what the assumptions are. I'm assuming that there's 10 apprentices in the cohort. The apprentices already have the 60 credit hours, those general ed requirements, so they're only going to need another 60 hours to finish their teacher prep program. We do just make assumptions that there's a primary mentor, which is an apprentice. If I'm an apprentice and Brendan is my mentor teacher, I spend 3 years with him, and he's called my primary mentor. So he helps and grows and builds me. So we talked about an annual stipend of $4,000 for a primary mentors. We also built in what we call secondary mentors. So I may have somebody that's amazing with classroom management, and so I may spend time working with that teacher on some of the classroom management pieces, and I may have somebody else in the district that is phenomenal with the teaching program of reading and things like that, and how to work with young students in early literacy. And so I may spend some time, if I'm an elementary teacher, with them. So we made an assumption that we had a mentor ratio of 1 to 5, a secondary mentor ratio of 1 to 5, and those mentors would also receive, since they're working with multiple apprentices, a stipend of $4,000. They also estimated the classroom, what they call multi-classroom leaders, which is somebody who works with like the primary mentors and the apprentices, kind of like school-wide or multiple school-wide, right, to kind of help support them, making sure that they're continuing to make gains and the program is being implemented well, and creating supports and removing barriers, are those kinds of things, right? So that's what that position's kind of doing, and we estimated that at $6,500. I don't know that all districts are going to need something like that. Our smallest districts, I think, and some of our districts may just use principals for something like that, which is perfectly fine. They also recommended what they call the education pipeline facilitator, which is the person that is responsible for ensuring the running of the whole program across the district. I don't think that's something you're going to need in small districts, but it may very well be something they may need in a large district with a lot of apprentices. While we take on a lot of the administrative burden, there is still a lot of compliance and regulatory things that school districts are responsible for. So it also helps make sure that they have that. So that's just the assumption as we look at these costs. So I kind of put together the cost for you guys, the expected cost per apprentice over 3 years, which is what we're expecting it would take for an average apprentice, is about $171,625. A chunk of that is whether or not they need the pipeline facilitator, sorry. And then if you look at the expected, so that includes all of their post-secondary costs and stuff like that for the college courses and that kind of stuff, and books and materials and those kinds of things. If we believe we have funding sources that will cover, we can find that can cover all of the post-secondary costs for apprentices, so the apprentices can come out completely debt-free. So I kind of give you the second line, because this is what districts would be incurring, which is really mostly salaries, right, for the most part. which is still like $154,741 per apprentice. So I just give you guys food for thought, right? If we wanted to do something as a state, I kind of put together kind of a proposal for you to kind of think about. I will say we have been working really hard to find funding sources, and I can find funding sources in a lot of ways to support the post-secondary education. We have really struggled with finding anywhere where there is support for the school districts, right? So if you think about all the discussions that you were having this morning about things that are funded in the school model, this is not funded in the school model, right? It's not even contemplated when we, of course. And so it is trying to find space in the, for districts to be able to do this. So we kind of put together a kind of a 4-year, like a district would apply for a grant that would basically last 4 years. It would give them kind of starting off as 100% covering the salary and related expenses, and I kind of decreased it by 25% over 4 years, so that by the 5th year, the school district would be 100% responsible for the apprenticeship or the funding associated with it. We think it gives districts time to realize the benefits of the apprenticeship, so that makes you want to change where you're allocating funds, but it also gives them time to figure out how to reallocate that so that they can sustain this in the long run. So, Mr. Chairman, this slide really is just kind of gives you some examples and some dollar figures to kind of play with. So if we look at, if really, like, I gave you kind of like, if you're gonna fund one apprentice through this, it's $128,000 over the 4 years. If you're doing 30 apprentices, we're looking at about a $3.8 million. If you're looking at funding 50 apprentices across the state, it's $6.4 million. And if you're looking at 100 apprentices, the cost estimates would say it's about $12.8 million. So I just kind of give that to you to give you some feel as to what this might look like. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will tell you we have received national attention for the work that we're doing. I won't read the quotes to you, but I will tell you we are often referred to as the Cadillac of the teacher apprenticeship with the way we have designed it, which we are excited about. And that is because we are able to use stuff that we have worked on for years that a lot of people haven't had access to. So with that, I think we will stand for any questions you have.
Mr. Chairman, my question is, looking at the last slide, how do those costs compare with educating a teacher through the University of Wyoming School of Education? Given the, that they don't all wind up teaching, and they don't wind up all teaching in Wyoming.
Mr. Chairman, give me just a second. I will tell you that, right, like they don't pay for mentor teachers, but when they don't have necessarily, well, I'm not sure about that.
No, typical tuition costs don't include the mentor teacher or the cooperating teacher when you're student teaching and those kind of things. It's just the cost of the attendance in the college.
And Mr. Chairman, the tuition cost is not the relevant figure. The cost of the School of Education, because the taxpayers are paying for a good deal of that, is the relevant figure. And we probably need to look at that whole cost and see. I'm trying to figure out, is this cheaper, significantly more expensive, significantly less expensive than our traditional methods of obtaining teachers?
Well, if you'll indulge me for just a minute, let's put a human face on this thing. Let's say that there's this woman, her name is Angie. She's in her 30s, she's got 2 school-age children. She's working as a paraprofessional in the special ed department. She's worked there for 4 years. She needs this job. She can't leave the community. How would that person, if she had the desire to get a degree and be able to teach special education, just walk us through quickly one of the pathways that, how would she get to be a teacher, and how long would it take? So tell me how you'd handle Angie.
Okay, Chairman Paxton. Angie would apply with her school district, so we'll add to your scenario and say that she lives in Shoshone and that she has her family there and she's working as the para at Shoshone High School, we'll say. She would go through an interview process with the district. She would go through, because that's also federally, because it's an apprentice, they do have to open it up to all interested parties. She would fill out an application, get interviewed. The district selects her. She enrolls into the program. So for example, the University of Wyoming does have a program that is online that she could take in Shoshone while she's maintaining her work in her house and all of that. I think it's, at this point, we're looking at more of a reimbursement of the tuition costs, but it'd be kind of funneled through however that money would come through the grants. As Dr. Ballard has mentioned, that we've uncovered some access, and through the Department of Labor, there are grants available. Those monies would come probably through the Department of Education, covering to the College of Education those tuition costs. She would attend her classes, she would be assigned the mentor teacher and go through the program, getting those increased wage progression every year that she completes, depending on how she's progressing on the coursework and on the competencies as well. So. Mr. Chairman, that is correct. Yes, she would be working side by side with that primary mentor teacher, maybe occasionally working with those secondary ones on particular skill sets that the primary may not be as strong as some others. Correct, yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if she didn't have an apprenticeship program to go through, if she went to go get her education, right now, the University of Wyoming only has one program fully online, and the community college, Central Wyoming College, has one program fully online. Both are related to elementary education and special ed. She would have to continue working as a paraprofessional because she probably can't get up and just walk away. So she would continue to do that. She would probably be in an out-of-state university if she isn't looking at elementary, because that's where the online classes are that are fully online right now. Because the University of Wyoming doesn't necessarily have an incentive to create the classes as they're looking at doing with the cohorts of the apprenticeships. Classes that she does stay with the University of Wyoming, she would have to pick up and go to Laramie and take classes. It would take her longer. She would be responsible for all of the costs unless the district chose to pay her for her, which some might do that. Then otherwise the apprentice is bearing the full cost of the higher education program. And it will likely take a lot more than 3 years.
So if Angie was a 50-year-old pipeline welder that desired to be a teacher, how would she go about that?
So, Mr. Chairman, I think at some point we're only in phase one, so I'll be honest, we were starting there. But if we open this up to folks that are outside the school district, which can absolutely happen, the district would just put out an announcement through their jobs boards, those kinds of things, looking for apprentices. They would apply and could be brought in as an apprentice, just like anyone else.
Mr. Chairman, in addition, the apprentices, as you mentioned earlier, they are employees of the school district. So in your 50-year-old pipeline example, that individual would come in, if they're selected for the apprentice program or otherwise, they would need to fit into that employment spot in that district.
Okay. Committee, yes, go ahead.
Just a curiosity question. How many teachers graduated from University of Wyoming last year? And how many openings in Wyoming were there last year that you know of? I mean, from the districts that had available openings?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nyman, I don't have those numbers in front of me right now. Typically, if memory serves, which is shaky, the University of Wyoming can produce about 25 to 40% of the demand for positions annually.
So demand, that'd be just like an approximate. How many graduates do we have out of the University of Wyoming each year in teaching?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nyman, I believe there's about 200 current enrolled students in there, so there might be 50-ish
In education. Teaching.
that are graduating every year.
Okay.
Those
Thank you.
numbers may be lower, but.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, questions or comments from the committee? Yes, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, and this one question is the numbers. So the one slide, it was the cost estimate assumption, 171,000 per apprentice, expected cost to the district 154,000, and then the other one that was 128,000, I think, in the other, so there was a difference in the cost. I really didn't get that, but my question really revolves around what Chairman Scott asked about the cost. So is this a more efficient means of getting teachers than just doing a teacher reimbursement program? I mean, repayment program, right? I mean, there's states around the country that have, if you agree to teach in Wyoming so many years, we pay your tuition, or we pay your loan off, or we do whatever to get them in there. Have you looked at what is the most efficient use of, or, have you looked at different options to see which of these would work the best in Wyoming?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I don't know that we've done that analysis, I'll be honest, but I think there's some things to consider in here. There are benefits associated with the apprenticeship program, right? You think about, we know apprenticeship programs work and work well in any other industry, right? In other industries, so keep that in mind. If you do a reimbursement model, just kind of like instead of, if we take Angie, for example, again, and instead of having to have her bear the full cost, the state will do a reimbursement program. There's a couple things that I think we have to think about. One is that she doesn't have 3 years in a classroom where she continuously learns how to become a teacher. Even if she stays as a paraprofessional, that's a different set of skills than learning to become a teacher. We believe that the program itself really does a lot of work with building teacher mentors, so building teacher leaders, and there's a lot of benefit, I think, between that. I mean, how many times have we heard teachers sit in front of you and say, we don't feel valued? This creates a value for them, right? They don't have to leave the classroom, but they do have the ability to help grow the next round, in a new round of teachers. I had a third one, and I just lost my mind. I lost my, I'm sure I had that, but lost my train of thought.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, this may not be Dr. Ballard's third point, but the teach grant types of things, yeah, the person might kind of pay their penance, if you will, and say, okay, I'll work in Shoshone for 5 years and then I'm out of here. Whereas the idea behind this apprenticeship is we've grown someone up from that community who's committed to staying there.
And Mr. Chairman, we have seen that in communities where they've put in like these bonuses, or they have, even if they've paid the districts have told us, like when we were talking about this and building the program with a large number of folks that we built this with, that they have teachers and maybe they pay their penance and maybe they don't. And then this district ends up being out a lot of money, even if they put like a requirement that you teach for 4 or 5 years, right? Like they have had people, for whatever reason, get up and move, and then they're still out the money because there's it's not worth going after someone to pay those pieces. And so, yeah, there's definitely some of that as well.
In the 3 school districts you have, that'll be the pilot programs, how many people do you anticipate will participate? Will there just be one per school district, or are you going to have more than one in each one of those 3 districts, or how's that going to work?
Mr. Chairman, so we're still working through all of that. I will tell you that when we asked them how many we needed about over, what were we, like closer to
70 or 80.
I was gonna say, I don't think it's quite that. I think it was like around 50 apprentices just between. This is the number they would, if they could afford all of that and had the system to work it, then that's what just those 3 districts alone could use. I don't think they're going to have that many, just to be honest, just as we're trying to figure this out. But that was the scale, and that's just 3 districts. I know we have some other large districts that are looking at a minimum of 30 to 40 is what they could use.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I wanted to, my thanks for you guys working on this, right? I mean, I think it's important we find different mechanisms to create teachers in this shortage and teachers that will stay. And, don't interpret my questions at least being anything other than just questions. It's how do you build a better mousetrap? And I think you're working on that, right? So I think we need to do that, and I appreciate the work you've put into this. So thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, let me say one thing. Yeah, this looks intriguing to me. I think I really like the idea of doing it with an apprenticeship model, doing it with something that people that are homebound can participate in. All of those things intrigue me. I think it's a good deal of promise, and I recognize you're just starting out. I do want to say to you very bluntly, if we're going to fund it at a much higher scale when it comes time to get that funding, it is going to be essential that you can answer the question, how does the cost of doing it with the apprentice way compare with the cost of, say, expanding the University of Wyoming School of Education, with the cost of having a loan forgiveness program or some other enticement method to get teachers from the schools of education in surrounding states? There's several ways we can solve the problem. And this has some advantages that would enable us to support something that was higher cost than some of those other methods. But you will be asked, and we'll have to have an answer to that to get anywhere in the legislature.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? All right, thank you very much. Looks like next on the agenda is an update on COVID-19 district funding allocation and maintenance of effort with WDE folks. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and committee members, Shelley Hamill with Wyoming Department of Education, and I'm here with my colleague, Mr. Trent Carroll, our Chief Operations Officer. And we're here to provide an update on the COVID-19 school district funding allocations and a review of the related requirements of maintenance of effort and maintenance of equity. In response to the COVID pandemic, Congress passed 3 different relief packages. You'll often hear those called CARES, which stands for the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. The second one, CARISA, which is the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, and ARP, the American Rescue Plan Act. Each of these federal relief packages included emergency and secondary school emergency relief funds that we all refer to as ESSER. With the CARES Act coming first, the ESSER funds that were allocated or called for in that act are called ESSER 1, with the CARISA being second. The ESSER funds that are prescribed in that act are called ESSER 2. And then with the ARP being the third one, sometimes people will refer to those ESSER funds as ESSER 3, but the official name for those is ARP ESSER. The CARES and CARISA, so the first two relief packages, both also included funds for each of the state's governors to use for identified educational needs, called the Governor's Emergency Educational Relief Fund, or GEAR. As directed by federal statute, the district allocations for each of the three ESSER funds were based on a Title I, Part A distribution methodology. They are not Title 1A funds. That has been confusing for some folks. ESSER 1 was based on the Title 1A proportions for the school year 2019-20. The CARISA and ARP funds, ESSER allocations, were based on the school year 2020-21 Title I methodology or proportions. So you'll notice at the end of this memo, there's an attachment, Attachment A, and that identifies each of the district's individual allocations for each of the three ESSER funds. I'd like to point out that the final column on the right, identified as 2020-21 Title 1A allocation proportion, that's what I just mentioned, and it applied to ESSER 2 and ARP ESSER. It does not apply to ESSER 1. So if you're a math whiz and you're crunching numbers and thinking those proportions don't work quite right for ESSER 1, it's because they don't. That column only applies and demonstrates or identifies the proportion for ESSER 2 and ARP ESSER of the total. So back to the memo. There were also some of the governor's GEAR funds that were allocated to school districts. For GEAR 1, just over $803,000 was allocated to districts to address connectivity issues during the spring of 2020 and to offset the increased costs of providing school meals to students during that initial response. You'll remember that most school districts across the nation closed down and shifted to a virtual setting, but still had concerns about providing meals to students. So that's what those funds were identified for. Of the governor's GEAR 2 funds, $3.5 million was made available to districts in an effort to help stabilize the workforce. These were often targeted at paraprofessionals, bus drivers, custodians, nutrition or food service individuals, et cetera. We'll go ahead and take a look now at the chart that's there. And it's just a quick summary of where the funds are currently at as an aggregate. So you'll see that the CARES 1, or the CARES, the ESSER 1, the total amount that was awarded to districts was just over $29 million. And of those, 99.663% were drawn down by October 21st. I checked those percentages today to take a look, and those were still at 99.63%. We certainly hope that there's a district out there that has just a little bit less to ask for reimbursement, as the obligation period has ended. It ended on September 30th, but they are in the drawdown. GEAR 1, also authorized by CARES, that money shows on the chart at 99.99%, but as of last Friday, it was 100% drawn down and reimbursed. The ESSER 2, authorized by the CARISA Act, was just almost $122 million. As of October 21st, almost $81 million had been reimbursed, or a drawdown of 66.38%. That has marginally bumped up to 67%. as of last Friday. The Gear 2, the $3.5 million that we just talked about, as of October 21st, there was just under $2 million reimbursed, or a 54.81% reimbursement. That has bumped up as of last Friday to 55.3%. And then the ARPESSER is, districts are focused on using that first in, first out, so we're just starting to see that being used. Almost $273.5 million were allocated to districts. Right now, as October 21st, there was just under 20 million reimbursed, or 7.22%. That has bumped up to 8.3%. So still a low drawdown, slow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just curiously, Ms. Hamill, is there any way of getting an audit of what the districts actually, paid or what they were reimbursed for? I mean, can we look at what these expenses were used for? I'm surely with these kind of funds, there's got to be some kind of a reconciliation of what they went for and what they were distributed to. I would be curious to know kind of what some of the projects were that were utilized, these funds were put to, and so we'd have an idea of how the districts benefited from them, and there were maybe projects or things like that that they could not have otherwise done, that they got taken care of, hopefully through some of these funding. So I would be curious to know how those monies were spent and to what districts that they were afforded to.
Mr. Chairman and Representative, there is a process when districts submit for reimbursement, because it is a reimbursement process. When they submit all of their, first they have a plan put in place, and they identify to us what they intend to use those dollars for. And when that plan is approved on the front end, to ensure that it aligns with what the federal government said you can use these dollars for, that's approved. Then when they submit for cash reimbursement requests, those expenditures are looked at to say, first, that it match your plan, so that we knew what you were doing, and then also, is it an allowable expense? We could put together some general themes so that you could see what they've been spending their funds on. A lot of districts have spent money, I can tell you just generally, on working towards remediation or closing that gap, that perceived gap from being out of school that last quarter of the 2020 school year. Other districts have used it to further enhance the stabilization of their workforce. Lots of different things. Many districts are using their funds on to address cleaning and the transmission of virus, to really slow down that. That was a big one on the front end for the first 2 years. We would see lots of districts submitting for reimbursement around those types of things. Touchless water fountains, of course, a lot on the front end around the nursing shortage and supports for checking health of individuals entering in the school building to slow down the spread. So just a wide variety of things. As things shifted from that into the time period where more people were immunized, we saw a lot of shifting to continuing to be better prepared to provide education virtually. So a lot more training and that ongoing support of families to make sure that they were connected, that their students were able to be connected, that those kids had one-to-one devices, et cetera. So just a real broad range of things that they utilized those funds for. And we saw a shift as our country understood more about it, and we're first initially responding to, okay, now we think we sort of have a handle on it. What do we do now to remediate or address those potential learning gaps? And then, trying to wrap up those things and prevent future spread.
Well, yeah, so that's pretty good overview, but you do have a list that you can kind of provide some, when they're giving you bids or proposals, surely there's some place where those proposals are just kind of managed and what you've ultimately spent the dollars on.
Mr. Chairman and Representative, are you looking specifically for an itemized list from a district or construction projects from a district? It would be really cumbersome, but doable to pull all of the expenses from every single district.
No, not a specific.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman? Not specifically from each district, but just something that says, this is what, this was what was submitted in general, and this is what these items were used for, just to have a general overview and idea of how these dollars were. And even in your description, it was very interesting to see how the dollars changed how they were used as we moved through this. We went from, support staff to technology to different things and how these dollars were done and what opportunities the districts received and how those dollars were used. And so I'm just kind of trying to have an overview of where it went and what it went for. So,
Mr. Chairman, I think we can provide that, Representative.
all right, thank you.
Okay, go ahead. Oh,
We're going, I'll wait till she's finished.
okay.
Okay, at this point then, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to my colleague, Chief Carroll.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Trent Carroll, Wyoming Department of Education. All right, so bear with me here. We're going to go through some federal regulations after a long day. So first, we'll talk about the maintenance of effort under the CARES Act. There was a question at the last meeting with regard to the supplement, not supplant requirement for ESSER and GEAR funds. And there was a little bit of debate around that. So we included some guidance here from the U.S. Department of Education. You'll see on page 2 of the memo that specifically addresses that. And it basically says, no, there is not an explicit supplement, not supplant requirement. However, states must maintain effort for elementary and secondary education and higher education. So let's talk about maintenance of effort under that first appropriation that Chief Hamel mentioned called the CARES Act. So this is a requirement that's in place for fiscal years 2020 and 2021. And it's based on a comparison of the aggregate level of state support for education provided in each year against the average of the state support provided for fiscal years 2017, 18, and 19. So we've worked through these calculations. It was a lot of work, a lot of communication with the U.S. Department of Education. The guidance around this is fairly flexible, which was favorable for us. There are 3 basic requirements for calculating this. You have to include the primary funding for K-12. You have to be consistent from year to year in what you're including in the calculation, and you have to be able to support it with adequate documentation. So those are the overarching requirements. But then within the calculation, there is some discretion in what can be included and excluded. And for example, there were certain things that were problematic for us. Major maintenance was one of those because of a change in the law a few years ago that changed the timing of those payments. It didn't work out with that year-to-year comparison, and so we submitted a request to be able to exclude that and provided justification for that, and they granted that request. So there was a lot of back and forth. At the end of the day, we feel like we did land on a calculation method that will achieve MOE compliance for both of those years. And would also note that we did that work in consultation with the State Auditor's Office, Budget Department, and then Higher Education. So next we'll talk about the MOE requirements under the CRISA and the ARP appropriation. So this is a little bit different. This effort tests the support for education relative to the overall state spending. So we still have a baseline that we establish using the 17, 18, and 19 years. And then we perform a similar calculation for fiscal years 2022 and 23. We are currently working on the first year of that. So one of the other flexibilities that we were able to leverage was using a federal fiscal year basis, which is kind of unusual when it comes to reporting for us. And so that took some work with the State Auditor's Office to figure out how to make that happen. So fiscal year 2022 just closed at the end of September. So we have started working on that and should have some information on that soon. But this would be the proportional test rather than just that aggregate test. So I'll stop there for any questions on maintenance of effort, and then we'll move into maintenance of equity. All right. Okay, maintenance of equity. So this maintenance of equity is a new federal requirement. And it's based on a per pupil funding comparison. We discovered quickly when we were working through this that Wyoming's equitable funding system is not a great match for what was envisioned at the federal level for equity comparisons and calculations. Specifically, our small enrollment populations create challenges with that, our resource-based allocation structure and the funding model, the changes from year to year and all the inputs that go into the funding model, some enrollment changes that happened during the pandemic with regard to virtual education programs, students enrolling and then the following year leaving and going back to their brick and mortar. All kinds of different challenges with this one. We've been working through that with the U.S. Department of Education. We do project a deficit for the first year, FY22, of just under $8 million using their calculation. And we're exploring options to reduce or eliminate that. One of those options is to submit what they call a tolerance plan that would describe the challenges that are unique to Wyoming. And then, of course, hopefully we would get approval on that. But that's where we are. We are working on that. Recently had a conversation with the U.S. Department of Education, and they pointed us to some work done in another state around this same issue. So we are not unique in that this is challenging for other states as well. And so we're currently exploring that, and we'll continue to provide updates as we go. And then on the fourth page, we included sections from the law that describe the maintenance of equity calculation for both the high need and highest poverty. So I'll let you review that and stand for any questions.
Mr. Chairman, on the specifics of this, Mr. Chairman, on the specifics of this, just taking a quick look at this attachment A, my impression is that the feds may have distributed the money or required it be distributed in such a way that it discriminates against the Wind River reservation districts. Is that valid, or am I in the top of my, I'm just making it off the top of my head calculation. It looks like that we do a much better job of funding those reservation districts than the feds do.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Scott, the federal government, I think, up against a quick timeline as well to figure out a way that they believed was equitable, chose to identify the Title 1A methodology simply because every state was familiar with it. And so that's what we needed to apply. I have to say I haven't heard any feedback from our Fremont counties suggesting that they feel like they were underfunded, but maybe you have. So I think that this was just simply the best way that they felt that they could get those funds out into the hands of districts quickly.
I haven't heard any feedback either. I'm just looking at the numbers there and speculating that they aren't doing as well by the reservation districts as we do in our funding, and wondering what the problem is with feds.
Mr. Chair and Senator Scott, so in addition, if you're talking about the BEI districts, those districts are also funded with a separate allocation of ESSER funding. So that you might see that. Of course, that would not be these specific districts, but we would anticipate, because the Title 1A methodology is based on population and poverty, that this would be equally reflective of their needs.
Mr. Chairman.
Follow up? Yep.
No, not a follow-up, different question. Seeing nobody else, let me ask two general questions, and I'm interested across the spectrum here, but particularly interested in the third funding, the so-called ARP ESSER. because it's the largest. My question is, did the federal funding do any significant amount of good in terms of our educating of students? And second, given the difficulties in dealing with the feds and all the strings that attached and the cost of dealing with them, in your judgment, would we have been better off to have turned these monies down and done without them?
Anyone want to answer that?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Scott, I think you're asking my personal opinion, personal professional opinion. I think it will be hard to walk away from those large amounts of money. I think that it allowed us for districts to raise that carryover cap, to be able to see districts be able to use these funds in ways that were potentially supplanting in some ways, because there was not that provision to allow a little bit of a higher carryover. So I think that was beneficial. I think our NAEP scores, our most recent NAEP scores would generally suggest that our students, that these funds or our school systems fared very well in comparison to other states across the country. And I think that's probably one of the best ways to make a comparison, to say, do these funds make a difference? And I think probably district testimony would be helpful at that point as well. I mean, that's.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I would respond to that. I think the first part of your reasoning is exactly the reason that the reasoning that we as legislators used to not try to interfere with that when it was happening. It's hard to walk away from that much money. I would not use our better performance on COVID than the other states. I think that is very strongly a function of the fact that we stuck to in-person learning to a much greater extent than most other states did. And I think it's given Wyoming a real leg up compared to the other states. I think that, and the part of our leadership and our governor in particular, and our educators and our teachers unions, all was testimony to we just plain did a better job with that than the other states that locked down a much longer time. I don't think this money had anything to do with that.
Okay, comments from the committee? All right. I failed also to get public comments for the apprenticeship program, so I'm going to open it for public comment on the Wyoming Teacher Apprenticeship Program and on the update on the COVID-19 to the public. If there's anyone who would like to testify or talk about this, please come forward. Okay, I don't see anyone. So we're ready for our next item, which is the IDEA Maintenance Finance Support Compliance, and our same WEDE folks are going to make this presentation also.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trent Carroll, Wyoming Department of Education. Okay, IDEA Maintenance of Financial Support Compliance. So we were asked, Mr. Chairman, to provide some information to the committee on this issue. So I'll start with a little bit of background. So this goes back really to the 2018 legislative session when the legislature modified the special education reimbursement for 2 years and basically imposed a cap on special ed reimbursement for 1920 and 2021. When this happened, we had several meetings that year with the Office of Special Education Programs. I'll just refer to them as OSEP throughout this presentation, because there was a heightened level of concern really at the federal level about our ability to meet our MFS, our Maintenance of Financial Support requirements, with this cap in place. And during those conversations, they expressed a desire to learn more about our entire K-12 education funding system and our method for calculating MFS. So we had additional conversations with OSEP in 2018, 2019, and 2020. In April of 2021, OSEP indicated that they had made a determination regarding an apparent failure of MFS compliance related to fiscal year 1920. This determination was made after they required us to calculate local funds, what they deem local funds, as a percentage of the total school foundation program guarantee, and then extrapolate that same percentage to the total amount reported on the WDE 401 for special education reimbursement. And this was how they wanted us to do that year-over-year comparison for MFS. We disagreed with their interpretation and their calculation for several reasons, which we'll get into. But after discussing this internally at length and then also through legal counsel, decided that the easiest path to a resolution on this issue might be available through a waiver provision that's available to states for what is described as exceptional and uncontrollable circumstances. And so we submitted a waiver request on the premise that the funding mix of state revenues in our funding scheme here in Wyoming is largely based on unpredictable mineral and non-mineral property valuations, which are highly volatile, obviously, from year to year. And then in June of 2022, we received a response denying those waiver requests and finding that we failed to meet MFS in fiscal years 19 and 20. So after additional consultation with the Attorney General's office, we decided to exercise the right to an administrative review through the U.S. Department of Education Office of Hearings and Appeals. So that's a little bit of background context. So what is MFS? So MFS is a condition of eligibility to apply for and receive federal IDEA funds. And the requirement is that states must maintain financial support for special education at or above the amount provided for the preceding year. So MFS includes the primary funding provided to school districts, state funding. Also includes state funds used by state agencies to provide special education services, preschool services at child development centers, and other state-funded educational services to support special education. So Wyoming, we have not historically disaggregated funds, as many of you know, for K-12 special education in our biennial budget request. I know several of you have sat on the Appropriations Committee and are familiar with our budget request. We have a single budget unit in our Agency 205 budget where we submit a request for all of the block grant funding, the entitlement payments that include everything that we've calculated is necessary for the two-year budget, including special education, but it isn't called out in a specific line item or disaggregated. So funds are, of course, provided as part of the block grant. And the School Foundation Program Guarantee for each district is always a combination of entitlement payments and revenue collected and dispersed at the county level. That's required under state law. Of course, we have a few counties that generate more than their guarantee. Those are our recapture districts. So because of our unique finance system, special consideration was made years ago, back in 2012, when we met with OSEP during a program monitoring visit and reviewed our MFS calculation process with them. They did not indicate that there were any issues at the time during those meetings or in their final report on that. And so we continue to follow the same process every year after. We include the full amount of the district special education expenditures that are reported to us on the 401. Then we add in the other state agency funding that we receive and also the general fund appropriation that the Department of Health receives, BHD, for those CDCs, preschools. Okay, moving into revenues. So Wyoming law dictates the resources that shall be provided to each school district to ensure the basket of goods. That's what we call the guarantee. We follow that cost basis. And we have specific revenue streams that are identified in statute as state revenues. So that's Wyoming Statute 2113-310A. And there's a whole list of revenues in there that include both the 6 mil county levy and the 25 mil levy, district levy. The legislature sets these assessments, as you know, and we feel that state law has full control over this revenue. Districts provide an estimate of those revenues each year to us, and then we subtract that from their guarantee to determine if they will be an entitlement district. So the primary issue that we are disputing here with the U.S. Department of Education and OSEP is whether those state revenues in statute that we are required to consider state revenues should be considered state revenues for purposes of MFS. We feel that they should be. And we also feel that any notion that our 100% special education reimbursement has somehow created a shortfall in special education funding is absurd, and we intend to continue defending our position on this. We are currently working through that appeal process. Those records that have been submitted in our briefings by the Attorney General's Office are public records, so if anyone's interested in reading through those, I could provide those to you. I know that there was a hearing on November 3rd, and then a date was set for January 20th, I believe, when we will submit additional information. And then I believe the hearing officer has 25 days to issue an order on that. Maybe it's 15 days, I don't remember. And then if the Secretary of Education doesn't respond, the order becomes binding. The Secretary of Education could interject and reject the order from the hearing officer. If that is favorable for us, great. If it's unfavorable, we have the option to appeal to the 10th Circuit. And if that ruling were unfavorable, we would have the option to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's kind of the legal process as I understand it. And would stand for any questions.
Okay, questions from the committee? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, just one piece before we wrap up here. I know I appreciate working with the LSO on some draft legislation that may help simplify our process going forward. Of course, we feel very strongly that there hasn't been a violation, and we will continue to defend our position on that. But we also recognize that because of our unique system, maybe there is a more simple way to demonstrate compliance with this in future years. And I believe the LSO will present draft bill. We appreciate that and would also ask that that be effective immediate instead of in July of 2023, so that we could show good faith effort that we are actively working on a less complex method in Wyoming that will clearly demonstrate compliance going forward.
Okay. All right, thank you. LSO?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Trent did a great job of sort of laying the foundation for this. This bill comes to you, 23 LSO 304, school finance special education funding at the request of the chairman. We worked with him as well as the Department of Education. This removes the calculation of the special education from the education resource block grant model, sort of setting it aside separate and distinct in response to the issues identified by Mr. Carroll. Page 1, line 8, moving on to page 2, line 23, creates section 1, amending 21-13-321B. If you look on to page 2, you'll note the substantive amendments. As I stated, these amendments take it out of the education resource block grant model and allow it to operate in isolation, separate and apart Page 3, line 2, section 2, this repeals the provision within the Education Resource Block Grant model that pulls in the previously mentioned statute 21-13-321. You can see that language on lines 35 through 37 on page 3. Moving on to page 4, line 2, this act is effective July 1st of 2023. As Mr. Carroll noted, the Department of Education would make a request that this, should this bill be sponsored, that this section be amended to be effective immediately. Subject to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Questions for LSO?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
So, thank you. I think I understand with Trent's explanation too. I mean, what we're trying to, I always am concerned about mischief. Are there going to be 2 lines then in the budget? What is it now, 206 or 205 or?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Harshman, I think that's at the discretion of the Department of Education, how they want to code that. Currently, all these school foundation program budgets sit within agency 205 within their school foundation program division. Whether they disaggregate that, I think he'll likely disaggregate that in his budget so he can clearly identify the amount that is budgeted for special education. In practical terms, let me kind of give you 2 examples what this does to the fiscal profile. This is a net zero impact. School districts will not receive more funding, but it will have a expenditure increase to the school foundation program, but also a revenue increase. So let me explain that. As Ms. Heitrich indicated, this will come out of the block grant model. Look at this now as a categorical grant, fully funded by state revenues, which we already agree is funded by state revenues, as Mr. Carroll indicated in his testimony. But this is a clear categorical grant that will be paid on in the same schedule of entitlement payments, 15% on August, 10% September through April, 5% in May. So Teton County School District number 1 this year is a recapture district. They get $0 from the school foundation program account to pay for their special education budget that's reimbursed to them. It's all paid through their local property taxes and other property or local revenues, or what we determine as state revenues. What this would do is the state will carve off this special education reimbursement, will pay them that separate, they'll actually pay the state that same amount in addition to their recapture amount. An entitlement school district will receive less state support through their entitlement amount, but they'll get that same amount back from the state reimbursement under this categorical grant program. So it's a net zero impact. You'll see within the fiscal profile the same amount of an expenditure increase, but also the same amount of a revenue increase. It all nets out to zero. So I just want to make sure that we're solving this in a pretty unique way, because I think we have a unique situation here on how we determine these state revenues. So I hope that helps provide some clarity on how this works.
Okay, other questions from the committee? What would you point out?
You.
Oh, you.
Mr. Chairman, as I understand the purpose of this will help us persuade the federal education bureaucracy, we hope, that our system is working the way we say it is, and that we aren't in any way slighting special education. Is that a correct understanding of the purpose of this bill?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, I think that's an appropriate summary.
And is the fact that we're bringing a bill, if we get into a court fight with the feds over there being unreasonable, which they are being, will some slimy lawyer construe this act as our admission that we were doing it wrong?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, I think that's an argument that can be made, but I could pretty soundly write something that would defend the state's position. And I think this bill comes at the request of the Department of Education for that very purpose. They came to this committee and to Chairman Paxton to sort of show the court in good faith that you're responding to their calculation. I think it really is just the simple fact that they don't understand Wyoming school finance and Wyoming funding. That's the bottom line. I think it can be appropriately explained just as Mr. Carroll explained it to this committee, and sort of as the other line of defense would be this particular bill.
Okay, follow up.
Mr. Chairman, I think we ought to sponsor this bill, but I think before we start moving it through the legislature, either LSO or some of us members or the state superintendent ought to go to the part of the Attorney General's office that deals with litigation and make sure we aren't digging ourselves a hole in potential litigation.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, my understanding is that the Attorney General's office is involved in the defense of the state with the United States Department of Education in the case that Mr. Carroll identified.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
go ahead.
That's different from, does the department, then does the Attorney General think this is a good idea when you look at the litigation possibilities?
Mr. Chairman, I can't really speak for the Attorney General's office, but I can tell you that they are aware of this, and they are currently working on several options that we could present for consideration with regards to the ongoing discussion with the U.S. Department of Education. Maybe there will come a time when we could talk about settlement options or other options to remedy this issue, but we are working very closely with them on every aspect of this.
Okay. All right, anyone else on the committee? Well, we're going to open it for public comment. Is there any public comment? Seeing none. Bill's been moved. Is there a second? Any further discussion on the bill?
Question.
Oh, we got one question.
Was it suggested that we change the effective date to immediately?
Oh,
So
yeah.
I would amend
that's
to
right.
change the effective date to immediately.
Good catch. Okay, been moved to change the effective date to immediately. Any further discussion on that amendment? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Okay, the amendment passes. Back on the bill. Questions called? Roll call?
Mr. Chairman, on 23 LSO-0304, school finance, special education funding as amended. Senator Beitman. Senator Ellis. Senator Rothfuss is excused. Senator Salazar. Representative Andrew. Representative Brown left a vote of aye. Representative Connolly. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman. Representative Newsom. Representative Overmueller. Representative Summers. Co-Chairman Scott.
Aye.
Chairman Paxton.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 13 ayes and 1 excused.
Okay, the bill passes. Is there any other business to come before the committee? Yes, go ahead.
I think I'm going to do this in an individual bill, but I think the committee could too. I've talked about this 80% average daily membership for full-time attendance. And the kicker is that most of our schools are doing a block schedule where there are 4 blocks, whether it's alternating or intense. So if you have a senior that takes a block off to work or to seminary, doesn't need credit or whatever, that's only 75, and the law says 80. So what is happening is you're seeing the resurgence of homerooms. So you take 10 minutes off of every class and you create a homeroom and you put that senior in there and then it gets them to 80%. And so the effect of it is you're having a lot of homerooms, there's good stuff happens, you know, vising, whatever, makeup. But you're basically every day taking 10 minutes away from math, English, science. I just did, you know, on a block schedule on that deal, it's 90 days, 10 minutes a day out of each subject, 900 minutes, 15 hours. That's like 3 weeks of school in math. I get it. The most important thing is what the teacher does with that time, but time is time as well too. But we forced that adjustment on districts to meet full ADM on those senior kids who got enough credits and are taking. So I don't know. And it's not a big money thing. It's just really, I like to give districts a chance to go back, to put all that time back in the classroom. That's it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Comment.
if you're going to do that as a private bill, consult with some of the members from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Absolutely.
Because this does impact some of their practices where the kids are leaving the public school for a while and going to religious education.
It does.
And they may have a feeling as to what that percentage ought to be.
Unless the committee wants to sponsor it right now.
It's not in the agenda. So.
Yeah, I hear you.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else from the committee?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say, in addition, you know, your last day, it's Representative Conley's last day, it'll probably be several of his last days on education maybe, but appreciate serving. Both you guys are leaving the legislature. I think the rest of us are coming back here, but you two won't be back, so really appreciate all of your service. Learned a lot from both of you. It's been your service to our state over many decades. Really appreciate it. So
Well, thank you.
Well done, you guys.
Very kind words.
Appreciate you.
I'll try to keep track of some of the things you're doing from a remote location where the weather's much warmer.
No, you won't.
I'm holding against you.
Well, it made me feel better to say it anyway. All right. Well, thank you very much. And